how will you pursue the UK imposing sanctions on Ministers Ben Gvir and Smotrich to safeguard liberal Israel?
Well, George, thank you for the question, and thank you to your group of international liberals who do so much for the party. So big reach out to you. I'm really proud that we were the first UK-wide party to call for immediate bilateral ceasefire. We were the first to do it, nationwide party, and we were right, and it was months ago. And it should happen. That is absolutely critical to the steps forward. And I do want to pay huge tribute to Layla. Do come and listen to her later this afternoon because she has such great insights. You know, the first ever MP of Palestinian descent, family in Gaza now. She's been able to speak with the authority, the expertise, like no other MP. And it's been lovely, lovely to work with her, even it's been such a difficult situation. And what she has shown, what we have shown as a party, is that we can understand both peoples and what they've been through. We can understand the trauma of Israeli citizens who've got loved ones held hostage in Gaza, who faced that horrific attack by Hamas terrorists on the 7th of October. We can understand the pain they're going through, and we can understand how horrified they are at their leadership, their political leadership. And of course, we understand the shocking carnage in Gaza and the way that innocent Palestinian civilians in Gaza are being bombed, have no food and water, and it is horrific. And we have stood up and we have called on the Israeli government, called on our government to be far tougher, starting with the immediate bilateral ceasefire, then moving on to release of hostages, getting the food in, the water in, the medicine, the aid in, and then, because we are the ones thinking forward, talking about the two-state solution, creating the process that could lead to that. And I recently was in Israel and on the West Bank talking to Israeli citizens and Israeli politicians and Palestinian civilians and Palestinian politicians. And I talked to Yair Lapid. He's the opposition leader. He's leader of a party called Yesh Atid. We talked to them because they're the only party, he's the only politician who gets up and makes the case for a two-state solution, who calls for Netanyahu to go. And you get real insights into how we can influence the Israeli government and the Israeli politics when you talk to people. But talking to the Palestinians on my visit, the Palestinians I met, was truly horrific. I met this person who had lost 40 people of her family. 40 people. And it just brought it home to you that the horror that is going on. And so we have to stand up with our international principles, with Layla making the calls that she's made to get our voice heard in British politics and to push the government to do more. And one of the things that I heard from Palestinians when I was on that trip was the huge and shocking rise of settler violence on the West Bank. And how, as the world's turned its attention onto Gaza, it's missing a massive story, which, if we don't tackle, could make this horrific war grow onto the West Bank, and then who knows what Hezbollah would respond, and the whole of the Middle East. It just doesn't bear thinking about. And that's why I called, having spoken to these Palestinian people, got their advice, I called that the UK government should sanction Ben Gvir and Smotrich, who are the extremist politicians representing the extremist settlers, and that they should be sanctioned. And we, George, will pursue that. We will pursue that with the UK government and with others. The American government is ahead of the British government. You know, who'd have thought it? You know, well, actually, it's not that surprising, I guess. But we really have to be strong. So do stay for Layla. She's so good on this, and we're really proud of her. So thank you.
Thank you. And I think George doesn't have a supplementary question, so we'll move on to another foreign policy question from Councillor Robin Ashby. Will the party continue supporting Ukraine in war and peace and work with European nations and NATO to maintain strong defences for freedom and democracy?
Of course we will. I and my wife have a Ukrainian refugee living with us. And when you talk to her, I won't give her details, that would be inappropriate, but when you talk to her, when she has her father and her brother back in Odessa, and Odessa is being bombed, you just feel the reality of what's happening. It brings it home to you. She had to go and see one of her friends the other week who had lost both her parents in a Putin bomb in Odessa. So this war on our continent is killing hundreds of thousands of people. From a tyrannical ruler who decided he was going to invade a democratic country. And it is shocking, and we, Liberal Democrats, with our commitment to international law, our internationalism, our humanitarianism, we will always stand with Ukraine against Putin's Russia. And we've worked constructively with the other parties. There hasn't really been a partisan issue. We think the government could have moved further, perhaps with sanctioning Russia, but we pushed them and they eventually got there. So there's been cross-party support on it, but there are two things I want to mention on this. The first is I think that's beginning to break down because of the debate around frozen Russian assets. There are billions of pounds frozen Russian assets in this country and huge numbers across Europe. And at the moment, although the government's beginning to talk about it, it's not doing it seriously. It's not making any progress. And you'll know Kira Riddick, that amazing Ukrainian liberal who's come to our conferences. I talked to her last time she was in London, and I said, what would you like us to do most of all? And she said, use those frozen Russian assets to enable Ukraine to fight back. And when one of our sister liberal parties in Ukraine asks us to do that, we are going to do that. We are going to campaign so those frozen Russian assets are used to help the Ukrainian fight back and rebuilding that country. And what we want to do in the face of the danger of Trump becoming president and weakening NATO and reneging on the support that America has hitherto given to Ukraine, we need to work with our European allies like never before. We have to strengthen those security ties, that joint action, because if we act together, along with our European friends, we can send a message, whatever happens in the elections next November in the USA. Let's hope it's not Trump. But if it turns out to be, Europe has to be there to fill the gap. And we need to prepare for that now. There's no time to lose. The attack from the Russian army on the east of Ukraine is happening now. So please, let us campaign on that issue. Make it clear that Liberal Democrats stand for action now with our European allies.
Thank you. Robin, do go ahead with your supplementary.
Thank you. I'm speaking for Liberal Democrat Friends of the Armed Forces, working with Friends of Ukraine. Northern European countries, including the new NATO entrants of Finland and Sweden, are strengthening their defences against possible aggression from the east, including threats to the small EU Baltic states. Finland, Sweden, Norway and Denmark already have, in effect, a joint air force. The Nordic countries are improving national resilience, expanding military equipment manufacture and extending national service. Will we stand with them as well as with Ukraine? Will we redouble our efforts to build our relationships with the EU for the common defence equipment specifications and procurement? And will we work to ensure that the USA doesn't walk away from NATO and lead by example in aiming for a new spending target of 3% of GDP on defence across the alliance?
Robin, thank you very much for that. You are absolutely right to highlight what's happening in Finland and Sweden. I'm sure others in this room have travelled and worked in Sweden and Finland over the years, and I never thought I'd see a day when their neutrality ended and they joined NATO. And that's really backfired on Putin. And it's one of the only sort of positive things that's come up so far. And I hugely welcome that. I actually welcome the way the UK government, and I don't often say that, but the UK government has worked with Nordics and Northern European countries to bring an extra dimension to the NATO response, and that is really, really positive. And that, I think, then takes forward to the wider European response, which you're absolutely right to say we need to be a leading party of. And you're also right to say that we need to work. If Trump does get elected, we need to try to persuade him that America needs to stay the course. We absolutely need that because, let's face it, they've already funded more than anyone else by a significant amount. And if they walked away, it would be a massive boost to Putin. So we have to work to keep them. But we also have to plan for the worst, hope for the best and plan for the worst. And that means really stepping up our game with our European friends.
Thank you very much. So the next question, I've composited two questions, one from Sarah Baker and one from Andy McGowan. So parent-carer roles are very exhausting. How will we ensure our children's health needs, no matter what their age, will be protected under the NHS? And how will you ensure the needs of 7 million unpaid carers are not forgotten in this general election campaign?
Well, thank you very much for that question. You won't be surprised to know that it's quite close to my heart as a parent carer myself. And what I've been heartened by is because we have been talking about the importance of family carers in all their sizes. Parent carers, yes, but people looking after their spouse who's got dementia, young carers, all the different types of people, millions, the 7 million unpaid carers. Because we've been talking about them, developing policies for them, being their voice, people have begun to hear that. People are beginning to hear that, and that is so welcome. And I'm finding on the doorstep, you know, I knock on doors and people who previously haven't voted for us, but saying, well, you're championing up for us, you're speaking up for us, and the other parties haven't. And when I talk to our candidates across the country, they're finding that. So many people are looking to us as we're saying something completely different. I know we as a party have said it before, but we're saying it with a degree of frequency and volume that I think is getting through. So I want us to continue to champion parent carers and all carers. For me, it's an issue. It's a question of social justice. Not for my family, we're fortunate enough, but I know through meeting many carers that it really hits their income. That they can't work or have to massively reduce their working hours. Often the person they're looking for, if they're an adult, was working previously to an illness or a disability. And so the income impact on carers is huge. And it's a big explainer of some poverty in some of our communities. So we have to stand up for carers for social justice. We also have to stand up for carers because of gender equality. Let us remember, a very significant amount of the care that is done by women. And, you know, we haven't taken care seriously as a society, and that's meant that women haven't had the share in society that they should do. Men need to play a bigger role, but we need to recognise the role of caring far, far more than we do, and that would improve the rights and the freedoms of women. This is the sort of systemic change I'm talking about, colleagues. You know, if we stand up for people who haven't got a voice in the other parties, we are talking about real change across our society. And that's why I'm passionate about this. And I'm passionate about it because you talk in the question about the NHS. I genuinely don't think you can sort out the NHS unless you really give support to family carers and reform social care. I just don't think it's possible. And so we are going to be campaigning on this, not just to election day, but beyond that, because this is part of who we are, and we are going to stand up for carers.
Thank you. So, Andy McGowan, you have a supplementary, I think.
Thank you. So young carers, you say, take on huge responsibilities, but some are going 10 years before being identified for support. Why do you think it's important that we as Liberal Democrats should ensure they get identified so they can receive vital support they need?
Before I answer your question, Andy, Andy does quite a bit of work for young carers as someone in the Carers Trust. I hope you don't mind me mentioning that. And also helps me and MPs from across party on the all-party parliamentary group for young carers. So, Andy, thank you for what you do. And your question is, of course, on the money. Identifying who is doing the caring, particularly for young carers, is absolutely critical. You know, I cared for my mum when she was terminally ill. I didn't think of myself as a carer. Why would I? Age 12 and 13, 14, you don't think of yourself as a carer. And my school certainly didn't pick it up. And there are huge numbers. I mean, there are hundreds of thousands of young carers in our schools and colleges and universities who don't see themselves as carers, and no one else sees themselves as carers. No one asks them whether they are carers, even though, you know, some of the times that their attendance, their ability to do the work is seriously hit by their caring role. You know, I've heard stories talking to young carers of young carers turning up to school late because they were looking after their mum or dad, and they get put in detention. You look at the analysis that's been done about young carers' performance at GCSEs, and it's 9 points down on young people who don't have caring responsibilities because they're not able to study as much because they've got a caring role. Now, if we want a fairer society, if we want to help these young people be the best they can be, both as carers and as individuals in their own right, we have to identify them. And we have to take them seriously. I mean, we've been campaigning hard on it, and gradually we've seen some change with the school census beginning to try to pick it up. But I'm not sure if schools have been equipped well for this, and we've got a lot of work to do. And there was the campaign day this week, wasn't there? And the Young Carers Covenant, which I've signed, and all the Democrat MPs will be signing, to show that we'll continue to campaign, yes, for making sure they're properly identified, but then making sure that results in a difference. And colleagues, we have a proud track record on this. You know, people like Paul Burstow and Norman Lamb, when they were able to influence this, they did a fantastic work for carers. So let's remember, we've achieved things, but we need to do more. And thank you, Andy, for challenging us on that.
Very much. Thank you very much. So, next question is from Jamie Rickleton. And Jamie says, right-wing commentators are using the post office scandal to attack you and the party. What is your message to them?
Well, first of all, in any time we talk about this, whether I talk about it, whether you talk about it, please start with the sub-postmasters. They're the ones who've had a horrendous miscarriage of justice done to them. And it's been done over many years, and they still haven't got the justice. I'm not convinced the government have got the legislation right even, and they're certainly not moving fast enough on the compensation. They still haven't learned the lessons, and I want to talk a little bit about that. But let us talk about them first before anything else. I have two constituents who I'm helping. One came to me 2 years ago, one earlier this year. And one of them served 16 months in prison for something he didn't do, and it has ruined his life. Another was never convicted, but he was suspended, and just listening, his mental health has been badly affected over 20 years. So this is real people's lives that have been harmed by this scandal, and we need to be championing justice, and we will do. We will do. But you're right, the right-wing press and Tory MPs have tried to weaponise it. Nothing changes, does it, really? But it's deeply regrettable they've chosen to try to weaponise it. But, you know, when I see people like Kelvin Mackenzie attacking me and the Liberal Democrats about it, I think they think we're a threat. I think they're worried about us. So let's just not be put off by them, and let's challenge them. If they really care about it, are they going to learn the deep lessons? Because for me, as I've reflected on it and looked at some of the stuff that has come out over the last few months, it's clear there needs to be systemic change. Systemic change. And what do I mean by that? Well, a whole range of things, actually. The whistleblower who was key to unpicking that, the guy who was a Fujitsu insider, who eventually found out and came forward and says, yes, there was remote access to the Horizon, blah, blah, blah. He first appeared in the BBC Panorama programme in August 2015, and then his evidence was critical in the High Court judgment in 2019. And the question we want to ask ourselves is, why weren't whistleblowers coming forward earlier? And you see this in scandal after scandal, contaminated blood scandal. I'm campaigning on a scandal over a drug called Primados. You see all these scandals, and you need people to whistleblow. And we've been campaigning on it. In fact, a great Liberal Democrat's been campaigning on, thought it through, put legislation there to make sure we have an office of the whistleblowers, properly supported so these scandals don't happen in the first place, and that is Susan Kramer. I want you to thank her. So we've been campaigning on that side of systemic reform, but we want more. I mean, when I look at the post office, it's an arm's length institution. I was told, Minister, you can't get involved because it's arm's length. It might be owned by you, but not run by you. Now that model's broken down. It's clearly broken down. So we need to learn the lessons. And it comes back to who we are as Liberal Democrats. We're about systemic change. We want to change the electoral system. We want to reform things like the NHS. We want to reform the environmental system, which has led to sewage in our rivers and pollution in our atmosphere. We want system change. And when we look at a scandal like this, we'll be saying, well, how do we prevent this ever happening again? And, when I see the Tories dragging their feet, even just on the compensation, they're not going to deal with it. Leave it to us. So we will be the party that campaigns for justice, but also campaigns for changing the system to prevent this happening again.
Jamie, I don't think has a supplementary question. You're good, thank you. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next question. It's a question from Michael Barrett-Gooding. And the question is, will you put our policies to end deep poverty by fixing the safety net front and centre of our general election campaign?
Well, thank you very much for that question. You won't have yet seen the manifesto because it's not published. But a lot of work's been done by Dick Newby, chair of it, by the FPC, by the Manifesto Working Group, because we were getting ready for election on May the 2nd. So a lot of work's been done, and I can give you a sneak preview. But it's because you've passed the policies, so you shouldn't be too surprised at them. And there's a massive programme to tackle poverty in there. As I touched on earlier in the question from Victor about the difference between us and Labour Party on the getting rid of the two-child cap on universal credit to tackle child poverty, that's in there, but there's so many other things as well. Let me just give you two other examples which will speak very much to this. One is on free school meals. I just find it scandalous that the Conservatives still haven't gotten this right. That there are so many children going hungry in our schools. We had to fight them before on this. Marcus Rashford had to fight them. Remember that one during the pandemic? And you know, our manifesto will absolutely have a commitment to make sure that all children who are in poverty get the free school meals and not just a small part of that group. So free school meals is just another way where the state, we as a society, can make sure that people who are suffering get helped. The final thing I want to talk about is about social housing. Because this is across the country, I just see it in my constituency, and you might be surprised at that, but it's a big problem. You know, I see people who are being affected by the huge rise in rents. So I was at Food Bank recently, and there was a mum and her kids, and got chatting, and she said she and her husband were both working many hours a week. But their rent had gone up so much, that they no longer could afford to pay their rent and buy the food in the way they used to. So they were going to a food bank. And I'm sure this is the case. I know in a lot of local authority areas where you're struggling with the impact on people coming to the council to help with their housing because they've been evicted or had to leave. In my constituency, that's resulted in massive amount of people in temporary accommodation. And that has meant now, because of the reduction in the private rented sector, because the Conservatives have messed up policies in that area so badly, that they're being put in hostels and hotels. And, you know, I meet regularly young families, 2 or 3 kids, in one hotel room. No facilities to cook. The kids are trying to go to school. Sometimes I meet families who've got a young person, a child who's got a special education need, and it's just so difficult for them. And that is the reality of poverty and inequality in our country today, in all parts of our country. And there are many ways to fix it, but getting serious about social housing is one of the best ways to fix it. I mentioned my wife a little bit earlier. She's the housing portfolio holder on Kingston Council, and I'm so proud she is leading the largest council house building programme in our borough for over 40 years. And, you know, there are lots of things we can do on housing, but I think, didn't we discuss housing at the last conference? I think we did. And great policies. But part of that policy pass was a focus on social housing. And I think we have to be the ones championing that. And if we do, we could make a big dent on the appalling inequality in our country today.
Michael, go ahead.
Thank you for that answer. At our spring conference in 2022, you said you would put a universal basic income and fighting poverty front and centre. Will you put our policy for a guaranteed basic income front and centre of our general election campaign too?
Well, wait for the manifesto to be unveiled, because I want to keep you in a bit of anticipation. Conference after conference have contributed to that, as you discussed, whether it's on housing or the way to reform benefits. And I think it's going to be a really exciting manifesto. It'll have a lot of those policies we've discussed. So just have to wait a little bit longer. I don't call the general election. I wish I did. Whether it's Rishi Sunak or some other Tory Prime Minister. And we are ready with a fantastic manifesto which will have something big and bold to say in tackling poverty.
Thank you very much, and we are now out of time. We managed to get through quite a few questions. Thank you very much for submitting the questions. Thank you to Sam Barrett, Hall Aid, and to Jenny Rigg by Aid. And above all, thank you very much to Ed Davey.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, guys.
We'll now be handing on to the next session, F11.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to F11, the wonderfully named Are You Drinking What We're Drinking? To those who are leaving the hall, if you could do so quietly so people can engage with the next debate. The FCC has taken drafting amendments to this motion, which you'll find on page 11 of the Conference Daily, and you can find the motion itself on page 28 of the standard printed agenda. To those who are leaving, can I just ask you to do so quietly? Can I ask Sarah Dyke to stand by? I'm going to call Josh Barbrindi, the parliamentary candidate of Eastbourne, to propose the motion.
Good afternoon, Conference. It is a pleasure to move this motion, no pun intended. Are you drinking what we're drinking, Conference? Well, in my patch in Sussex, let me tell you what local swimmer Tracy Hudson is drinking. Sewage. Here's what Tracy shared with the local newspaper of a perilous swim she attempted some months ago. She said, "We splashed around for about 10 minutes, and I thought, actually, this doesn't feel right. It felt a bit slimy. At that point, I kind of stood up. I was maybe up to my waist, and then I realized that actually all around us was poo. It landed all in my mouth and up my nose. Disgusting." It gets worse. Tracy's a nurse at the local hospital, and that night she fell ill. But she ploughed through to the next day so that she could go to work and treat her patients. But she said, "When I went to work, I had full PPE on and I couldn't breathe." She was later diagnosed with a respiratory infection whose source she traces right back to the sewage. Conference, our swimmers, our communities, our key workers deserve so much better than the industrial levels of raw sewage dumping by water companies enabled by this Conservative government. This isn't how it's meant to be. Now, I'm going to set the scene a little bit more for this motion by taking you down to my majestic, magnificent town of Eastbourne. Way! So Eastbourne's founding father was the 7th Duke of Devonshire, this Willy Wonka-type landowner who had a grand vision to unite a number of villages in the area and settlements at the foot of the Seven Sisters downland in order to create the country's best seaside resort of Eastbourne. And he did it. 94 glorious beaches. Today we get 5.5 million visitors every year. And in fact, 28% of the jobs in Eastbourne are connected with our tourism and hospitality sector. And up until 2016, our beach water, which is the jewel in our coastal tourist crown, had a water quality rating of excellent. But under this Conservative government, it's plummeted from that 3-star rank, which is the highest, to as low as just 1 star, including some alarming levels of E. coli. What a dishonour to the founding vision of Eastbourne, never mind our environment. And the situation is mirrored across our country, in our lakes, our rivers, our waterways, our coastal resorts, whose sewage shenanigans I'm confident we'll hear about throughout the rest of this debate. But what do Conservative MPs have to say about this exactly? Well, mine says only 5% of the outflows are sewage. Most of the content is rainwater, so it's okay, is what is reportedly being said. Well, I challenge those Conservative MPs who say such things to run a bath, fill it with 5% sewage, which is about a Coke bottle's worth, and soak it up if it is truly acceptable to them. Conservative MPs also tell us that rogue builders are to blame for misconnecting pipes into our seas, rivers, and lakes. Sure. We're also told that we're to blame, that it's us flushing stuff down the toilet that we shouldn't, that is responsible for the national sewage scandal. Rubbish. Let me be clear, conference, the blame lies with water companies who use our waterways as a dumping ground and the Conservative government for letting them get away with it. Worse, these companies are profiteering to the tune of hundreds of millions of pounds a year through their dumping. We need to sort this out. We need to shake up this racket of water companies propped up by the government. We need to pivot it from an industry that's hell-bent on making money for its shareholders into a service that delivers for our communities and for our environment. Now, we've already called for a ban on bonuses for polluting water company fat cats. We've already called for a sewage tax to show them who's boss and make them pay for the damage. But this motion, drawn from Tim's excellent policy paper, contains the roadmap for going even further. The roadmap starts with ending the ludicrous self-monitoring of sewage dumps, no more marking their own homework, with us instead replacing this with a new regulator to replace the failed Ofwat. And it continues this roadmap by giving that new regulator proper teeth. The teeth to fine polluting water company execs themselves and the teeth to prosecute them in the most serious of circumstances. It involves creating a compensation scheme for victims of sewage illness, like Tracy, who I described earlier. It involves forcing water companies to fund local environmental reporters in much the same way that the BBC funds local democracy reporters to hold our democracy to account. It involves mandating seats for consumers on water boards so that the communities that they're meant to serve are reflected in the way they're governed. The list goes on, which you'll have seen in the conference papers. But at the heart of this roadmap is a fundamental rebalancing of power away from the big dogs, in this case the water companies, and back to our communities where that power truly belongs. And this kind of endeavour is the epitome of liberalism, liberalism that our country needs and deserves. I therefore urge you to back this motion. It will show the British public that where the government won't safeguard our seas, our rivers, our lakes, our waterways from gross profiteering and ruin, Liberal Democrats will. Thank you, conference.
Thank you very much, Josh. Can I ask Nicholas Chan to stand by, and I call Sarah Dyke, the Member of Parliament for Somerton and Frome, to speak in favour of the motion.
Conference, like me, you will be absolutely disgusted by the behaviour of our greedy water companies who continue to pollute our precious waterways. And we all know that the Conservatives simply don't have the backbone to clear up their own mess. In Somerset, we continue to experience the effects of flooding events, which are occurring at an ever-increasing rate. Last year, I spoke with a constituent in her 80s with significant mobility issues, whose home was flooded with dirty water containing raw human waste from an outdated local sewage system that failed to cope after decades of neglect and after a serious flooding incident.
In 2021, all of Somerset's 5 rivers were rated poor by the Environment Agency, and it has been left to volunteers such as the Friends of the River Frome to act. But they, like others, battle against the tide, as 400,000 hours of sewage has been discharged into bathing water sites alone in the last 2 years, resulting in half our bathing sites being rated as poor. However, yet again, it is the Liberal Democrats' relentless pressure that has forced the government into action. Recently, the Farley Hungerford bathing water site in Somerton and Frome is one of 27 that's been considered for protected bathing water status, following our party's campaigning. Continued pressure and hard work by colleagues has forced this government into action. But we demand that this country goes further. We want to end the archaic system where water companies self-monitor, as they have evidently proven to be incapable of doing so effectively. We have even seen disturbing reports that allege potential criminal behaviour from water companies. So we want to issue fines to the top water company executives, and we want to strengthen the powers of local authorities to hold water companies accountable. By taking robust, firm action, we can ensure that all our waterways are accessible and able to be enjoyed by all. We will ensure that we can all, once again, revel in nature, swim in our rivers and seas, and that our wildlife flourishes. We will no longer let nature down. The Liberal Democrats have vowed to stand up for our water and recover our environment. Conference, this is achievable, and we can continue to fight back against the water companies by backing the motion and stopping the pollution. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. I call Nicholas Chan, the parliamentary candidate for Chatham and Aylesford, and ask Lisa Smart to stand by.
Conference. This was the test result when Chatham and Aylesford Liberal Democrats tested the River Medway. I mean, this is shocking. If you look at number 4 here, we found 16 E. coli in just 1 ml of water. That equates to 3.4 times above the safe levels as defined by the Environmental Agency. Now, I've always lived near the waters. I love the water, going for a swim, or even going for just a canoe in the morning. I think the best way to protect our water is always that our residents can take a leisurely dive and play in the waters whenever they like. But when I speak to the residents at Chatham and Aylesford, and many of them are actually living right uphill, further from the river, they are all concerned about the river pollution in River Medway. And they equally find it is appalling that the Conservatives have left where their children have actually played, where the local scouts actually played, where the local Duke of Edinburgh Awards actually have the expedition on, was 3.4 times above this safe level. And so what does Southern Water do? Southern Water was penalized by Ofwat over the past few years. And how do they give compensation to us? Well, maybe they will send water butts to your your homes. But these water butts are 200 to 500 liters of size water butts, which doesn't fit into everyone's home unless you maybe have a four-bedroom detached, or it just doesn't work. So what happens is that when I speak to the residents at their doorstep, most of these water butts simply get rejected. But Southern Water can say, I've tried my best, just like Ofwat have replied to local reporters that they have tried their best. But, and the list goes on. So Ofwat has also said it's not a problem that there was a sewage discharge. That's what actually they told KMTV when we had an interview with them. They said, well, Environmental Agency is in charge of sewage discharge. I mean, it's not untrue, it's actually quite right, but this is a paper pushing and shuffling responsibility which doesn't help any residents up and down the country. So the Coastal Rivers and Lakes Authority plan that the Liberal Democrats put forward is a solid plan that will consolidate monitoring and stop Conservative 36 years of pushback on the River Basin Plan. I mean, the River Basin Plan is something that is costed, and it is already reflected in residents' water bills. And with this Liberal Democrat motion, we will actually be able to provide residents a safe quality drinking water and safe water for their children to play again. So I hope that this motion will definitely pass, and I will no longer see this water pollution again in River Medway. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicholas. I now call, could I ask Charles Tucker to stand by? And I now call Lisa Smart, the parliamentary candidate for Hazel Grove.
Afternoon conference. This Conservative government is a disgrace. Now, this is not necessarily new information to many of you in this room, but this sewage scandal and sewage being pumped, raw sewage being pumped into our rivers and our seas is yet another example of an issue they have failed to tackle. Yet another scandal on their watch. It's 2024 and we shouldn't have to worry about severe illness being the price that you have to pay for taking a paddle. I shouldn't be going to sixth form colleges doing a chat about getting involved in politics and being pulled aside at the end of the session by one of the students to ask for my help, because he was called Ethan, he and his friends had been swimming in the River Goyt in Marple the previous year, and 5 out of 6 of them spent 3 days in bed following that swim because of the gastro problems that they had. He didn't want this to happen to others. He called on us to help. So what can we do? Well, this excellent motion that's before us today outlines a number of actions that would go some way to tackling this issue, and I could have chosen to spend my 3 minutes on any one of those thoroughly worthy things, but I am a local government nerd. I am strongly in favour of good governance and scrutiny, so I'm going to talk about lines 54 to 61 that call for more powers for local authorities and the specific and practical ways in which local authorities can take a role in tackling this issue. We as Lib Dems often think that local authorities should have far more resources to discharge the responsibilities placed upon them, and we'll all have an opportunity to talk about that in a discussion tomorrow where we talk about local government financing. But we've already got some powers as local councillors. I chaired the first council-led inquiry into the sewage scandal at Stockport Metropolitan Borough Council. We had local wildlife lovers in. We had the local friends of the Chadkirk estate come in. We had United Utilities, we had the Environment Agency come in. And we used that platform to target our attention on the things that could be done, yes, by the council through planning policy, but also by United Utilities, our water provider, and also by the Environment Agency in terms of measuring, monitoring, and being used as a regulator. We brought forward useful transparency, useful accountability, and I think as those of us in the room who are councillors have already got some of those powers. Lines 54 to 61 call for further powers, and I strongly support that. The way the water companies are allowed to carry on by this Conservative government surely cannot continue. We need action on this. And if we pass this motion today, and if the suggestions in there get taken up by those in power, we would be in a much, much better state. This Conservative government is a disgrace, and we should flush them away at each and every opportunity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lisa. Could I ask Clive Jones to stand by? And I call Charles Tucker from West Worcestershire, who would like to speak against lines 31 to 32.
Afternoon conference. Well, lines 31, 32 talk about the abolition of Ofwat and the formation of a new body. And before I'm finished, I hope I'll have given you a little bit clearer idea of why I think that those are perhaps going a little bit too far. Because conference, before we, the scene setting for this is the wheels have truly come off the water industry's model. There is a fundamental flaw in the economic model, which was promoted by the Tories in 1989 at privatisation. And it's now evident for all of us to see. The Tories' dogmatic insistence on the freedom of capital is reflected in the way that Ofwat regulates the industry. It has failed not only to serve our communities, it has allowed the companies to get away with pumping raw sewage into our rivers in unprecedented quantities because it enables them to maximise their profits. At the same time, the Tory dogma that companies will regulate themselves in the public interest is the reason that the Environment Agency has been prevented from regulating water companies' environmental impact effectively. Self-monitoring, as has been said before, lets the companies mark their own homework and doctor what they show to the public. And let's not beat about the bush, they definitely do doctor what they show to the public and indeed what they monitor. If this is combined with the 70% cut in funding for the Environment Agency in the past 10 years, it really is no surprise that the companies have managed to get away with putting profits before environmental performance at every stage. And it's Ofwat that has allowed the water company owners to strip the assets and use them to pay dividends to shareholders. That's why Thames Water is in the pickle it's in. Macquarie took the assets from their company and left them saddled with huge debts. And the public is now being asked to pay for those debts. So where do we go now? And this is where we talk about lines 31, 32. Ofwat, so we said before I start that I'm not in favour of forming new bodies, spending months and years setting up new bodies when there are existing bodies which have got a statutory role to play. It's far too important for us to deal with the sewage pollution now than it is to spend that length of time trying to establish new bodies with wide remits when there are already bodies which should be doing the job. They're not doing the job because of the way that they have been structured and directed by the Conservatives. The Environment Agency, having had that huge amount of cut, is no longer able to do the regulation that it was set up to do. So Ofwat must, of course, be redirected, it must be restructured and made into a body that serves the community. And at the same time, water companies must be restructured as public interest companies.
Could you draw your remarks to a close?
Yes, indeed. I think we should spend our time stopping this pollution and stopping it now. But this is a good motion, and I do support it. Please.
Thank you, Charles. I call now Clive Jones, the Parliamentary candidate for Wokingham, and could I ask Sarah Gibson to stand by?
Thank you very much. As you say, I'm the Parliamentary candidate for Wokingham, and it's my job to beat John Redwood. In the Wokingham constituency, we have the rivers Thames, Loddon, and quite a few tributaries. I do lots of knocking on doors, speaking to residents to find out about their concerns and their worries. And the three things that come up on the doorstep are the NHS, the cost of living, and the pumping of raw sewage into our rivers. In November, I knocked on the door of a very keen fisherman who often uses our local rivers and streams. And he told me that he was absolutely fed up with seeing raw sewage flowing on the end of his rod. It really wasn't acceptable. What were we going to do about it? He and his wife had voted Conservative for the last 40 years, but now they were not going to do that anymore because the Conservatives were doing nothing to stop this raw sewage being pumped into our rivers. We have to sort this issue out because the privatisation of water companies has been a disaster. Whose idea was it to privatise the water companies back in the 1980s? It was John Redwood. He used to proudly boast that he persuaded Margaret Thatcher to introduce the privatisation of water companies in the 80s. He doesn't do that so much these days. My wife takes part in triathlons. That's a 1.5 kilometre swim, a 40 kilometre bike ride, and you finish off with just a short 10 kilometre run. She loves it. She takes it really seriously. She's even got into the GB squad for her age group and will be competing at the European Championships later this year. So we're all really, really proud of her. Fantastic achievement. But there are more and more issues with the water quality that these triathlon competitors are having to cope with. Many of them are becoming sick after swimming in our rivers and seas. It's become a real concern for organisers of the events and for the competitors who need to be kept safe. We must keep campaigning on this issue of sewage dumping in our rivers and seas. It just is not acceptable. I don't want my wife to be swimming in dirty water. I don't want my fisherman resident to be sitting on the riverbank seeing raw sewage flowing in front of him. We have to do whatever we can to stop this happening. Please vote for this really, really good motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Clive. Could I ask John Harris to stand by, and I call Sarah Gibson, who's the parliamentary candidate for Chippenham, to speak in favour of the motion.
Good afternoon, Conference. As has just been said, I'm the parliamentary candidate for Chippenham. But prior to that, I spent 25 years working in planning and development, and I've built an awful lot of sewers in my life. And since that, I then became a county councillor at Wiltshire and legislated over an awful lot more sewers in our areas. So I feel as if I know a little bit about how the pipework works. And that's really what I wanted to mention. And I think this policy starts extremely well to talk about what we need to do. But what we do need to talk about is legislation. And we cannot expect our private water companies to do more than what is legally obliged to do. And they need to do more than just improve the infrastructure to deal with the discharge through overflows. And like any profit-making organisation, they are not going to do that unless we legislate. And the issue is more than just when they fall foul of the current standards. The issue needs to be addressed, pardon the pun, upstream of the problem. And I want to mention 3 areas which this motion addresses, but where I think we need to go further. The first is that the current permitted phosphate discharge levels are just not strict enough. And talking to Wessex Water's engineers at length, they agree they would do more if they were obliged to. They know that the discharge from farming needs to be legislated and monitored. And we've said before, the EA just simply doesn't have the monitoring equipment or the time or the money to do this properly. And importantly, we need planning legislation needs to be so much stricter. We need to remove those loopholes that allow surface water runoff from major developments and large refurbishments going into the rivers. This rainwater should not be going into our foul water system at all, not ever. If it wasn't going into it at times of torrential rain, which we're getting more and more of, we wouldn't have overflowing treatment plants to this extent. We wouldn't then have the water with your 5% or 10% sewage going into rivers. And the bathing areas of my youth in the River Avon would still be safe to bathe in, as they're not at the moment. And finally, we need taxation on water companies to be spent in collaboration with our local authorities to start putting in the separate surface water drainage that was recommended by EU legislation back in 1994. 1994, Other European countries did it, we didn't. So we need to be starting to encourage that level of collaboration and legislation. And all this needs to come from a national legislation that the current Conservative government hasn't wanted to do. But we can and we will, because we have the know-how and the understanding. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Could I ask Bobby Dean to stand by? And I call John Harris from Richmond and Northallerton.
Conference. When water companies borrow millions, not to invest in reducing pollution, but to pay dividends to their shareholders, who have no choice but to pay that monopoly, that's not illegal, but in my view, it is morally corrupt. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. A succinct contribution to the debate. I call now Bobby Dean, the parliamentary candidate for Carshalton and Wallington, and can I ask Zoe Franklin to stand by?
Sorry, I wasn't expecting to have to come to the stage that quickly, but thank you. I live right by the River Wandle, which is a chalk stream in my local area, and I recently had the pleasure of making a film about it with a local film crew. It was fascinating to learn about its history. I discovered that after the Industrial Revolution, it was officially declared a sewer because it had got so bad. But I also learned about all the good work that people were doing to get it back to good health. But that good health is now under threat once again by sewage dumping. And I think others have already explained this scandal well, so I just want to focus on one part, which is just how they've gotten away with it. If you're a water company who sees its service is to ensure clean water run through our taps at home, then you will do almost anything regulation allows to maximise profit outside of that. Why would investors seeking to make short-term returns be bothered about the sorts of long-term investments that are only likely to provide returns to the environment and not to themselves? And the answer is they are not. And the proof is demonstrated by Thames Water. It is nothing short of a disgrace that an investment banking firm was able to purchase that company, load it up with debt, neglect long-term infrastructure investment, dish out dividends for their shareholders, and leave it for someone else to pick up the pieces later on. Conference, that is not the way a utility company should be run, and it's time to bring an end to this hyper-privatised model. We need people whose priority is the environment and local communities helping to run the show, not just shareholders solely motivated by profit. And we must find better ways to raise the capital we need for major infrastructure investment and ensure that as much profit as possible is ploughed back into this mission. And if all this seems a bit obvious, then it only demonstrates just how short-sighted the initial privatisation of water companies was. We must reject this false dichotomy that is either disastrous underinvestment with the state or total exploitative corporatisation of our public utilities. The Liberal Democrats in this paper are providing the answers, where proper management means that those responsible for our waterways act properly and are governed by, for and with the community. Conference, that is the Liberal way, and I urge you to back this motion.
Thank you very much, Bobby. Could I ask Helen Maguire to stand by and I call Zoe Franklin, the parliamentary candidate for Guildford.
Conference, my constituency for Guildford is facing a double whammy when it comes to water company related issues. First, of course, there is the ongoing issue of sewage flowing into our rivers. There's a particular story, there are so many, but one stood out to me recently where knocked on the door of an individual who coaches a children's cricket team. He talked about how in the summer the children enjoy a little dip in the local river. Many of those children then go on to get really quite unwell. How has it got like this? We know, and we have to address it. But the other part of that problem that we face in Guildford is around water infrastructure and resilience. The policy contained in this motion is absolutely crucial in ensuring that Thames Water and other water companies step up and address both. And I particularly want to highlight and endorse lines 54 to 61, which propose to increase powers to local authorities to hold water companies to account. Locally, Conservative MPs have failed to provide robust and necessary challenge to Thames Water on behalf of residents, and of course we have seen the government continue to do the same. In fact, during an 11-day outage last year, their interventions hindered rather than helped our residents. Likewise, their government colleagues have failed to stop sewage overflow or ensure water companies invest in infrastructure. In contrast, my colleagues at Guildford Borough Council and neighbouring Waverley have a consistent track record of holding to account, despite having fairly limited formal powers to do so. Giving local authorities power to create new water boards to hold water companies to account and address local issues puts power in the hands of councillors and council staff who have the most direct understanding of the issues experienced by an area and the most effective ways to address them. For these boards, I particularly would like to see them having the power to compel water companies to answer questions posed by them, including questions posed by residents. For example, at a recent scrutiny meeting where Thames Water attended, they gave us completely conflicting answers when questioned, particularly on how they decide about compensation during water outages. And then they agreed to meet with me to discuss this in detail and have failed to do so. And I hear this so often from colleagues. Water companies are providing an essential public service and should not be allowed to hide from the customers and the communities that they serve. Enough is enough, conference. Government, regulators and water companies must step up and address the failures that are causing long-term damage to our environment, making people sick and leaving communities without resilience in their water infrastructure. I really want to thank everyone involved in drafting this excellent motion and the accompanying paper, and I urge you, conference, to support it in full. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zoe. Could I ask Tim Farron to stand by, and I call Helen Maguire, the parliamentary candidate for Epsom and Ewell.
Afternoon, conference. Ladies and gentlemen, in 1851, the renowned painter Sir John Everett Millais found inspiration in the serene waters of the Hogsmill River, immortalising its beauty in his iconic painting, Ophelia. This masterpiece is now housed in Tate Britain, capturing the tragic drowning of Shakespeare's Ophelia in the very waters of the Hogsmill, a poignant reminder of the connection between art, nature and our shared heritage. Now, the Hogsmill is one of two rivers in my constituency. It's a precious chalk stream, one of only 210 such rivers in the world. Fortunately, the Hogsmill remains relatively unscathed by sewage discharges, preserving its pristine beauty for generations to come. However, the same cannot be said for the River Mole, the other river in my constituency. Flowing through the Surrey Hills area of outstanding national beauty, the Mole boasts breathtaking cliffs that have captivated walkers and cyclists alike. Yet beneath this scenic facade lies a grim reality. The River Mole is one of the most polluted rivers in our country. In just the first 2.5 months of 2024, Thames River has dumped untreated sewage into the River Mole for a staggering 4,500 hours. This relentless assault on our environment, emanating primarily from 9 sewage treatment plants along the river, has transformed a once pristine waterway into a cesspool of pollution. Earlier this year, the storm overflow tanks overflowed onto public paths, causing a public health outcry. Thames River have simply given up on any attempt to contain and treat their sewage. Thames Water's negligence has reached a breaking point, and our Liberal Democrat MPs have rightly called for Thames Water to be placed into special administration ahead of parliamentary debate. With a CEO ousted and debt soaring to an alarming 18 billion and talks of potential collapse of the government, Thames Water's mismanagement threatens the very fabric of our water infrastructure. Meanwhile, water bills continue to rise, meaning that this essential resource may soon be unaffordable for many. And the root of this crisis, as we all know, lies in the short-sightedness of privatisation in 1989, which allowed water companies to leverage assets, accumulate staggering debts, borrowing 60.6 billion and prioritising stakeholders' dividends over our environmental stewardship. Conference, we cannot simply sit idly by as our rivers choke on sewage and our water companies flounder in chaos. We demand accountability. From water company CEOs, a comprehensive 25-year investment plan and urgent action to clean up our rivers, as this policy sets out. Let us not drown in our sewage as Ophelia drowned in the Hogs Mill. Together, let us envisage a future where the River Mole is not a cesspool, but a sanctuary, a designated bathing site where families gather to enjoy the crystal clear waters. Let us send a clear message to water companies: prioritise the interests of your customers and restore our rivers to their former glory. Conference, I urge you to support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Helen. I call now Tim Farron from Westmoreland, Furness and Eden, a Member of Parliament and our Parliamentary spokesperson for the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs.
Thanks, everybody. So the title of this motion is, Are You Drinking What We're Drinking? It's a nod, by the way, to those of you with long enough memories, to the Tories' dismal dog whistle slogan of the 2005 general election, Are You Thinking What We're Thinking? That was a slogan to drag our politics into the sewer. Our plan is to build a bigger sewer. If you are a puerile, immature individual who's nearly 54 yet still has a subscription to Viz magazine, you're not ever going to find poo not funny. However, the injustice, and it is an absolute injustice, that we see the industry's abuse of power at the expense of people, and that is enough to make you cry, especially if you are the Member of Parliament for Windermere. This debate demonstrates our passion and our commitment to fixing this Tory disaster. Bear in mind the Liberal Democrats have led on this. Labour have barely said a word. It's something all of you should be hugely, hugely proud of. The debate started with Josh Barbrinder, who gave a fantastic opening speech. He talked about Tracy in his constituency ingesting sewage, one of the hundreds of people who've suffered ill health as a consequence of the Tories' failure to tackle this problem and the water companies getting away with it. He talked about how the Tories are trying to blame anyone but themselves and their friends in the water industry. Sarah Dyke talked about the Liberal Democrats' relentless action nationally and locally, Somerset and beyond, taking the lead and calling for local authorities to be given more power. And Nicholas Chan from Chatham and Aylesford talked about citizen science. He demonstrated the consequences of that, the work that's been done in his constituency on the Medway, and how Southern Water could not be relied upon to provide accurate testing, so he and other citizen scientists had done it for them. Lisa also talked about Ethan and his mates catching gastroenteritis after swimming in Marple, and talked again about the importance of strengthening local authority powers, and also, of course, reckoning that, and using the first to use the phrase that we should flush away the Tories. That'll be on a leaflet coming soon. Charles Tucker talked about many really important things, but he talked especially about water companies marking their own homework. 70% Environment Agency funding cuts meant that regulation is weak, and challenged us on the abolition of Ofwat. I don't agree with you, Charles, but I thought you made a good and cogent case. Clive Jones pointed out to us the very fact that John Redwood is singularly responsible for water privatisation in the first place, and talked about the impact upon anglers and the health of our rivers and on wildlife, and indeed on his triathlete wife, to whom we wish every success in the future. And Sarah Gibson from Chippenham talked about, from her own expertise, the importance of us understanding that legislation is key to us tackling this dreadful problem, and reminded us that water companies will only do the right thing when they are forced to do so, and also, of course, reminded us that combined sewers are part of the problem. John Harris gave us a punchy, to the point, and brief intervention. It'll never catch on. But it was absolutely outstanding, and it is a moral outrage. And by the way, his parliamentary candidate, Daniel Callaghan, is outstanding and in Richmond, and is Rishi Sunak's opponent at the coming general election. We wish him well, and I'll be going to give him a hand. He is also my former researcher, and I'm very proud of him. Bobby Dean spoke passionately about his experiences with the River Wandle and the importance of local grassroots campaigns to clean up the river locally. He explained that the system is full of perverse incentives. Most of the privatisations were wrong, but this one was done particularly badly, and in the case of Thames Water led to absolute disastrous performance, and Sarah Olney has quite rightly talked about this only the other day in Parliament. He also made the case strongly for the Liberal Democrats' policy of turning water companies into community benefit companies. Zoe Franklin was one of many people who spoke about sickness caused particularly to young people by, in this case, a local cricket team going for a post-match dip only to discover that they'd become ill as a consequence. And she also pointed out the lack of investment in infrastructure and how key that is to the problem we now find ourselves tackling with, but also praised rightly Liberal Democrat councils using the powers that they've got, making their own luck to try to make a difference on the ground. And then Helen Maguire talked about the River Mole, one of our precious, massively important chalk streams, and yet suffering 4,500 hours of sewage dumping from Thames Water. She reminded us also that rising water bills paid for by ordinary households up and down this country are the consequence of the water companies' failure and the government's failure to regulate them properly. The scandal of sewage being dumped in our waterways is not just an environmental tragedy. It is not just disgusting and a threat to human health and to wildlife. It is also a colossal injustice of hard-pressed bill payers, exploited by companies who are permitted to do so by a Conservative government that is too weak and too compromised, I suspect, to tackle them. It is, as I may have already mentioned to you, my utter privilege to represent England's Lake District. We are, dare I say, the prettiest and the wettest place in the country. Storm overflows are an even bigger deal when you live in a place where the storm is the norm. So to us, this is completely flipping personal. We are furious. But our communities right across the country are furious about this outrage, determined to fill Parliament with people who will do the right thing by our lakes, our rivers, our coastal waters, and all of those people who enjoy them, to reform the system, to put right the injustices, and to clean up the Tories' mess. Let's pass this motion and let's be those people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tim. For those of you who have joined us online, the voting is now open. I'll let that run for a couple of moments before taking account in the hall. If anybody is wishing to vote, you need to be sat down. I see there are a few people joining us for our next session. If you would like to vote, please be seated. Okay, could I see all those who are in favour of the motion? And could I see all of those who are against? That is overwhelmingly, if not entirely, emphatically carried. Thank you very much, everybody. A huge thank to my aide, Councillor Simon McGrath, and my hall aide, Alison Jenner. I hand over to Alison Rouse now for our next session, which is a speech from our international spokesperson, Layla Moran. Thank you.
Right then, hello everyone. Welcome, colleagues. If you'd like to take your seats as soon as possible, please. Been told my voice carries. Hello everyone, welcome to this session. I would like to introduce you to the MP for Oxford West and Abingdon and our Foreign Affairs spokesperson, Layla Moran. Layla, if you would like to come to the stage, the floor is yours.
Thank you, conference. Thank you for that warm welcome. I want to start by thanking you all for your many messages of support that you've given me over the last few really difficult months. I never thought that we would be here in the middle of one of the worst moments in the history of Israel-Palestine, and I never thought that I would have this part to play as the only MP of Palestinian heritage and as Foreign Affairs spokesperson for our party. The personal and the professional have completely collided. So before I explain a bit about how I see the future, I'd like to start by sharing a story from the past. My mother's family, the Jauhariyas, are from Jerusalem, and I want to say hi to my mother. It's her first conference, by the way. Thank you for coming, Mama. Now, we're Greek Orthodox, and we would worship at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and that's the church that's built on the site of the crucifixion of Jesus. And we shared our beautiful city with other faiths in friendship and respect. My great-grandfather, Wasif, would chronicle in meticulous diaries the stories of Jerusalem in the early 1900s. And he'd tell of how in his childhood, his brother would dress up during Passover as a Hasidic Jew, complete with curls and a black hat, and join in with the Jewish festivities. Can you imagine such a thing now? It's inconceivable. But that was 100 years ago. And I grew up on these stories of how different communities would celebrate together, not just by coexisting, but actually thriving together in that incredible land that is the cradle of three major world religions. But then in 1948, everything changed. For my family, that was the year we were forced onto a different path, just like so many other Palestinians, in what is called the catastrophe, the Nakba. The following decades were ones of displacement, fear, and uncertainty, but also resilience and grit. And I am so grateful to my grandparents and my great-grandparents for the path they forged for our family, starting again with almost no possessions, to build a life that led to me being in this place at this time. Thank you. And conference, all we have ever wanted was the right to live in an independent and free Palestine, and I owe it to them to use this position to do whatever I can to make that a reality. Now, conference, we cannot squander this horrendous moment, because in it there is an opportunity. In history, each time there were eruptions of unimaginable violence, there also emerged a fork in the road. 1948, 1967, 73, 91, 95. October the 7th, 2023 is another such moment. The world yet again has a choice to make. Either we let disaster happen over and over and over again, or we choose a different path, one that says we have had enough. Now, conference, this is the first time we've actually met since October the 7th. That dark, dark morning. That senseless killing of 1,200 Israelis, acts of horrific sexual violence, and the abduction of 240 others by Hamas terrorists, which has accelerated the Middle East region onto a path that is truly perilous. And I stood here from this stage a decade ago and condemned Hamas for their terrorist tactics and nihilist rhetoric, and I do so again today. Their barbarism has no justification. Every life they took is a tragedy. Every hostage they hold captive should be let free immediately with no conditions. And let us be clear, there is no path to peace with Hamas in power. But conference, let us also be honest, because Hamas are not the only extremists who have responsibility for where we are now. The assault on Gaza by the Netanyahu-led far-right Israeli government has gone beyond the pale. Over 30,000 Palestinians killed, mostly women and children, 1.7 million displaced, on the brink of, if not already in famine, no clean water, no sanitation, no healthcare. Every single person there hungry, terrified, and trapped. We need a ceasefire, and we needed it yesterday. It's clear this war is not serving the interests of long-term security, and it's certainly not serving the interests of peace and two states. But it is serving the wicked fusion of Netanyahu's self-interest and the extremist settler agenda of ministers Ben-Gvir and Smotrich. And if you want proof, just listen to what they say. Genocidal rhetoric and a complete rejection of a two-state solution. The defense minister called Palestinians human animals. And he continued to say, and I quote, "Gaza won't return to how it was before. We will eliminate everything." So just as Hamas cannot remain in power, Netanyahu, Ben-Gvir, Smotrich, and all those who back this extremism must go too. They are all dangerous. They are all blockers to peace. But getting them out of power, I would put to you, is also not enough. Unlike this government, we Liberal Democrats back the International Criminal Court investigation into human rights abuses. They should all be arrested, tried, and thrown in jail for what they've done. Now, make no mistake, this is not a fight between Israelis and Palestinians, no. This is a fight between the extremists and the peacemakers. And it's spilling onto our streets, igniting flames of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. And who are fanning those flames? Well, it's not just the extremes of society. It's coming from the heart of the Conservative Party itself. And how often have they told us that we must pick a side? Either you stand with the hostages and against Hamas, or you stand with the Palestinians and against Netanyahu's corrupt government. Well, we Liberal Democrats reject this false dichotomy. If we are forced to pick a side, then we pick the side of humanity, compassion, and peace. And the thing is, conference, we're not alone. Just a month ago, I went and visited Israel and Palestine. And I stood in a kibbutz on the southern border where Hamas killed 20 members of that community. And I looked across from one terrified place over to another, which was Gaza, one of the most densely populated areas on earth, where mosques, universities, and schools have been reduced to rubble. Above me, I could hear the drones, and I could hear the crack of the machine gun fire, and I could see the billowing plumes of black smoke. And all I could feel was deep, deep despair for the Gazans who were trapped and could not leave that torturous reality. Among them, my own extended family. For the last 5 months, they've been trapped in a church in Gaza City in the north, where they took refuge after the IDF bombed their house. They and the people they shelter with have nothing to do with Hamas, nor did the babies in the incubators who died, or the pregnant women, or the journalists, or the brave aid workers. They are no more responsible for what Hamas did than you nor I. And as I walked back, alone with only dark thoughts, a woman called Ronnie took my hand. Now, she's an Israeli peace activist who herself has lost many family members on October 7th, and she embraced me. And she whispered, "I'm so sorry." And I said it back, and we cried together as we walked on shoulder to shoulder. And in that moment, I felt hope. I was astounded by how many people I met who, in the face of unspeakable tragedy, chose not the path of anger, but instead chose to ever more firmly advocate for peace. Yotam, from Kibbutz Be'eri, took us to visit his house, the first time, in fact, he'd been there since his parents were killed. And I asked him, "Why don't you want revenge? How can you, after what's happened, keep advocating for peace?" And he said, "Vengeance is a valid feeling, but it's not a valid policy." Those few voices already exist in Israel and Palestine, and we must amplify them now. If Yotam and Ronnie can show that level of grace, we have no choice but to heed their calls for an end to the violence once and for all. 2 states, 2 people living in dignity, side by side. That is the only path to peace. That is the future we choose to forge. And today, conference, I invite you to pledge once again to fight for it. Now, conference, over the last decade, we have consistently set out the most radical and comprehensive policies of any party in the country on this issue. I would like to thank Liberal Democrat Friends of Israel and Liberal Democrat Friends of Palestine for the way they've navigated this difficult territory, and it's testament to our collective hard work and compromise that we are the only party that does not stand divided. In 2015, we backed policy that said we shouldn't be selling arms to countries like Israel whose governments choose to disregard their human rights obligations. And since 2017, I've laid a bill to recognize Palestine in every session that I could. And in 2021, we set out the policies in full. And they included a 2-state solution based on 67 borders, a peace fund to build bridges, fresh elections to replenish the moribund Palestinian leadership, and support for UNRWA. Now, without UNRWA, there is no mechanism to distribute aid in Gaza. What already is a human catastrophe would descend even further. And so our government shouldn't be hesitating in restoring full funding to UNRWA immediately, just as our European allies have already done. The policy also called for the UK to support the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice, and how prescient that was, given how this government has repeatedly sought to undermine them. But it also pointed out something incredibly important, that the illegal settlements in the West Bank are one of the biggest barriers to a two-state solution, and we believe it is high time they were stopped in their tracks. We called then for a ban on illegal settlement goods being traded in the UK, but now we have gone much further. We've led the calls in the sanctioning of violent settlers who stand for anything but peace. Ed extended that call to include the extremist ministers Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, and today we can announce that we are calling for these sanctions to apply not just to them, but anyone who enables the insidious settler movement, the lawyers, the accountants, the businesses. If they support illegal activity, they shouldn't be allowed in the UK, and if their money is flowing through our economy, we should go after it. No longer can acting with impunity go without consequence. When we say we believe in international law, we mean it. Now, Conference, I just want to say, through this incredibly difficult time, I've been so proud of our party. We were the first UK-wide political party to call for that immediate bilateral ceasefire. And at every single available opportunity, Liberal Democrat MPs have voted to stop the killing, to release the hostages, and for a lasting peace. And we supported every option, even if it wasn't perfect, that inched ourselves there. We put humanity first and refused to play petty party politics with Palestinian and Israeli lives. Our steadfast commitment to international law has been our anchor, something our opponents have been sorely lacking. What an indictment of our politics, that on this, the gravest of issues, our parliament has too often been reduced to jeering and chaos. Those politicians lost sight of what really mattered. We as a party never have. Shame on the SNP. Shame on them for weaponizing this issue to further their aim of independence. But shame also on the Labour Party for choosing narrow electoral calculation over its moral compass. And shame, too, on Rishi Sunak and the Conservatives for making a mockery of our country's name on the world stage. Britain deserves better than all of them. But signs are that this morally bankrupt Conservative government is finally on its way out. And as we approach this election, just remember, electing more Liberal Democrat MPs to Parliament makes us a voice no one can ignore. Those core guiding principles of international institutions, human rights, and rule of law means we have so often been on the right side of the argument. On apartheid in South Africa, on the war in Iraq, on Hong Kong, on Europe, and now on Israel-Palestine. Voters can trust that the Liberal Democrats will always stand for what is right. The country and the world needs us more than ever. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, Mama. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you very much, colleagues, and thank you very much, Layla. And also, obviously, a big thank you to our signers on the side of the stage. Go on, sign that bit. And we move on to the next item, which is F13, Tackling Persistent Absence. And I hand over to my colleague, Hannah Kitching, bless her, who will be chairing this item. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, conference. Could you please all take your seats swiftly and safely, because we're already running a little bit late in the hall this afternoon. Conference, if you're staying for the debate, can you please take your seats quickly so that we can get started? Thank you very much. Okay, good afternoon, conference, and welcome to item F13, Tackling Persistent Absence, which you will find on pages 32 to 34 of your standard printed agenda, or under conference documents in the app. There are 2 amendments to this motion, which you can find on page 11 of Conference Daily. May I remind all speakers to keep to time. I now ask Andy McGowan to stand by and call Munira Wilson, MP for Twickenham and our Parliamentary spokesperson on education, to propose the motion.
Thank you. Gosh, how do I follow that speech by Layla? Good afternoon, conference. Liberal Democrats have always been the party of education. It's core to our mission, empowering and equipping every child, no matter their background or their needs, to flourish and to achieve their full potential. We know that education transforms life chances. It's why I'm fighting the Tories day in, day out, to get them to invest in our children's future. For the vast majority of children, that means being in school, in a school environment that's both supportive and nurturing whilst delivering high academic standards. Yes, of course, there will always be a small percentage of children whose best interests are served outside a formal school setting, whether at home or in alternative provision. As Liberals, we always support and champion parental choice. But friends, far too many children are missing out on an education. They're missing out on the opportunity to boost their life chances. They're missing out on friendships and fun. There is a serious crisis of children regularly missing school. Since becoming Children's Commissioner, Dame Rachel de Souza has made school attendance her absolute priority. She says that persistent absence is one of the issues of our age and has called for a razor-sharp focus on the problem. Liberal Democrats agree. Persistent absence isn't just missing the odd day of school, it is missing 10% or more of your lessons. That's a day every fortnight. And 20%, that's 1 in 5 of all pupils, is missing that much school. This is not an easy problem to fix. The reasons for absence are complex and tackling it will be hard, but tackle it we must. And this motion sets out a range of practical and supportive tools that will help parents and teachers. Poverty has an effect on attendance. Pupils who are eligible for free school meals are twice as likely to be persistently absent from school than those who are not. Poor mental health amongst children and young people has skyrocketed and is a big cause of absence. Just last month, I heard about a teenager in my constituency who hasn't left his house for over 4 months whilst he's languishing on a CAMS waiting list. The rate of persistent absence in special schools is significantly higher. Yes, medical conditions account for some of this, but other factors play their part as well. Too many children with special educational needs and disabilities are missing out because their needs are simply not being met, whether in mainstream or special school. This government has failed families with children with SEND, a point regularly highlighted not just by me and other Liberal Democrat colleagues in Parliament, but by their own side too. When I find myself agreeing in the chamber with David Davis, Jake Berry and Matt Hancock, I do start to worry. Now, I welcome Amendment 1 about young carers. Carers should be proactively identified and supported with their education and caring responsibilities. And they should have the same educational opportunities as their peers. But perhaps the most shocking thing is that we simply do not know the number of children who have disappeared from the school roll. There is no register of children not in school. The Children's Commissioner estimates that 10,000 children left the state education system, and we just don't know where they have gone. We would place a duty on local authorities to maintain a register of children who are not in school and, as Amendment 2 notes, give them the funding to do so. This is not an attack on homeschooling. The register is about safeguarding those children whose whereabouts are simply not known. Now, each child will have different reasons for school absence. Liberal Democrats would roll out a programme of education welfare officers and attendance hubs across England so that every school has support. And we would train more teachers to be able to undertake home visits so we can begin to work with families to understand and remove the underlying barriers to school attendance. On SEND, Liberal Democrats would establish a national body for SEND to fund support for children with especially high needs. Paying for children with the highest needs from a central pot rather than expecting local authorities to be able to pay would alleviate some of the huge financial pressures that so many local authorities are experiencing. And training our early years and teaching staff to identify and address needs early is also critical. On poverty, I am so proud that it was Liberal Democrats in government who successfully rolled out free school meals for all infants. We did this because we know that when children go hungry, they make less progress, they have poorer behaviour and worse health outcomes. To help with hunger and poverty, Liberal Democrats would expand free school meals to every child in poverty. We would tackle the growing mental health crisis amongst our children and young people, which is such a big driver of school absence, by placing a dedicated, qualified mental health professional in every school. And if Bridget Phillipson is listening today, that means both primary and secondary. With around half of all mental health conditions manifesting themselves before the age of 14, early intervention is absolutely crucial. And using the polluter pays principle, we would triple the tax on social media giants to pay for it. We need to make school a place where children want to go, a place of education, absolutely, but also a place that helps develop essential life skills, where learning is fun, where science experiments amaze, and where creative subjects inspire. Liberal Democrats would introduce a commitment to provide pupils with an extracurricular offer within schools, including things like sports, music, drama, and art, drawing on best practice from the youth sector. Conference, persistent absence is complex. Every child and family is unique. None of the things listed in this motion is a silver bullet that will fix this problem overnight. But if we are serious about giving our children and young people the very best start in life, we have a duty to start fixing it. Too many children are missing too much school, and that will have consequences for the rest of their lives, for our society, and for our economy. So I urge you to support this motion and Amendments 1 and 2 today. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I please ask Lucy Netzinger to stand by
And I now call Andy McGowan from West Suffolk to propose Amendment 1.
Thank you, Conference. The main purpose of this amendment is to acknowledge the reality that if we want to tackle this crisis in education, we cannot do that unless we improve the support available for young carers. Conference, on Monday, more than 1 million children across the UK will begin another week of trying to balance their education with caring for someone because of a long-term illness, disability, or addiction. That is 2 young carers in every class, in every school, right across the country. And through my work with Carers Trust, I get the privilege of speaking to so many of these young carers and hearing the challenges they face. Young carers like Alice. Alice is 15 years old, and since she's been 5, she's been caring for her dad, who has a range of physical health conditions that makes him prone to seizures. Many mornings, Alice has had to provide first aid to her dad, summon help for him when he's had a seizure and a fall, and even clear up blood off the floor, all before going to school. For young carers like Alice, it can have a huge impact in terms of when she gets through those school gates, not having the support she needs. If she's late, if she's not managed to get her homework done, if she's being bullied for being different. For so many young carers, not having that support just means that attending school is just one challenge too far. So having a young carers lead and a young carers policy will mean that young carers like Alice will no longer have to retell their story to their geography teacher, their history teacher, their PE teacher. They can get that support with their homework, a little bit of flexibility with their deadlines. And they can ring home just to make sure that the person at home is okay. These small measures can make a huge practical difference. But Conference, schools cannot be asked to tackle this issue alone. Across the country, there are over 15,000 young carers caring for 50 hours a week. They would fill this hall 10 times over. And over 3,000 of those are aged just 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. They urgently need more support. Their families need some more support. And that is why we need that carer strategy for them. And we need it now, Conference. This past Wednesday was Young Carers Action Day. And Young Carers chose the theme for this year as a fair future for young carers. They launched a Young Carers Covenant, asking for organisations, individuals, politicians to join and show that commitment to that fair future. Conference, by supporting this amendment and by supporting the motion, you can send a loud message to young carers across the country that the Liberal Democrats are committed to a fair future for all young carers and for all children as a whole. So I urge you, Conference, to please support the amendment and the motion as a whole. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I now ask Sarah Dyke to stand by and call Lucy Netzinger to the stage to propose Amendment 2.
Thank you, Conference. I'm speaking today to ask for your support for Amendment 2, which is a very small change, reinforcing the need for funding for local authorities to support the provision of the record for children not in school. Local authorities are fully supportive of the need for this record, and indeed, with the local authority responsibilities for keeping all children safe, we are probably more aware than most of the need for such records. But there will be a cost to providing for local authorities to provide that kind of service and to do it well, for compiling and managing those records. And this amendment simply recognises that such funding would need to come from national funding arrangements. We know that education out of school is a good option for many children and families, and I have enormous respect for the parents who home educate, many of whom put incredible care and effort into providing the right education for their children. However, as with all families, while the vast majority are utterly devoted to the welfare of their children, there are a tiny minority of cases where children not attending school is a way of hiding abuse. The attendance of children in school is clearly not a perfect mechanism to check against abuse and neglect, but it is one way in which we can check on the welfare of children, and this record will allow another small way to try and keep vulnerable children safe. I also want to ask for your support for the whole motion, with my role as leader of a county council as well as an ex-teacher and a parent.
Persistent absence from school is in many cases a sign that all is not well and happy for a child, and this should be a sign to step in with additional support. We want our schools to be places that children want to be, places they feel safe, where they can feed their hungry minds and spend enjoyable time with their friends. I know it won't feel like that every day for every child, but that is what the goal should be for our schools. But at the moment, for far too many children, school is not providing that safe, happy space. The elements in this motion which focus on education welfare, on attendance hubs, on teacher training in family support and mental health support, as well as the extra curriculum offer, are all focused on this goal of noticing early when children are beginning to struggle and giving them and their families the support they need to enjoy school and to thrive. So please support Amendment 2 and the motion as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I ask Lucy Tong to stand by? And I now call Sarah Dyke, who is the MP for Somerton and Frome, to speak in favour of the motion.
Thank you. Conference, I'm pleased to have the opportunity to speak about this important issue, one which I've seen in my own constituency. Last month, Carly, a concerned mum of 3 who lives near Glastonbury, asked me to highlight the enormous gap in mental health support for young people because her 11-year-old has mental health concerns that result in their regular absence from school. Persistent absenteeism increased dramatically following the pandemic and has increased to over a quarter of students in secondary school in 2021-2022. The issue is particularly prevalent in those who are entitled to free school meals. In the 2022-2023 academic year, 42% of free school meal users were persistently absent. Conference, as a caring society, we must respect our children's right to a good education. We must acknowledge the challenges they are facing, and we must act to support them. Recently, the Education Select Committee endorsed introducing mental health absence codes in schools to better track the impact of mental health and school attendance. It identified that fines do not address the barriers associated with persistent absence. So this motion calls for the introduction of a dedicated mental health professional in every school, so every child and every child's parents have someone they can turn to for help. It calls for the expansion of free school meals to all children on universal credit. Now, we know that hungry children do not learn as well as fed children, so we must act to ensure children have the very best learning environment possible. This uncaring Conservative government has caused a crisis in SEND funding that's keeping children out of school. Local authorities right across the country are struggling to cover the costs of increased demand for EHCPs. Now, a teacher in my constituency recently told me that children without a plan and the accompanying support face diminished life chances. This is a disgrace. We must therefore provide local authorities with extra funding to halve the amount of schools need to pay towards the cost of EHCPs and establish a national body for SEND to fund support for children with high needs. Conference, by endorsing these actions, we can bring children back into school where they have the fundamental right to be. School should be a place for learning, for enjoyment with friends, and a place to grow. But Tory cuts have changed this reality, and we must reverse their damage by voting for this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I please ask Noah McGarry to stand by? And I now call Lucy Tong from Harrow, who is speaking against the motion.
Conference. I support much of this motion. I think that there are a lot of very good points in it, but there is one particular line that, as a chronically ill person, very much concerns me. The line that talks about parents not being sure after COVID whether or not to send their child to school with a cough or a cold. The Lib Dem Disability Association did submit an amendment, which unfortunately wasn't accepted. But we wanted to change that line out to say that we should give clear guidance that children should not attend with contagious illnesses. You should not send your child to school if they are ill, because it's not only inconsiderate of every other student. People like me can get incredibly sick. The last 4 years have been incredibly demoralising for disabled people. We've been reminded how disposable a lot of our lives are to many people. And I think it's really important that we make clear that education is a right for everybody, including those people who are more vulnerable. People with disabilities already are less likely to complete their formal education and possess basic literary skills. And making sure that schools are a safe place for disabled people is incredibly important. Making sure that we're able to go to school and not come home and, you know, if you have an autoimmune condition like myself, become incredibly sick. That can have a long-term effect on our health. The motion points out that the national crisis is doing untold harm to children's education and well-being and impacting their future life chances. And I would ask you all to consider the way that having a disability, or for example, if you were to contract COVID, which I would remind people the pandemic is still ongoing, there have been over 3,000 deaths in the last 9 weeks. If they are to contract something like that, that can lead them to be disabled for the rest of their life, which I would, very much say, as a disabled person, has impacted my well-being and my future chances. So would you please ask you to consider that when voting for the motion? Thank you.
Thank you. Can I now ask Sophie Parker Manuel to stand by? And I now call Noah McGarry from East Dunbartonshire. Noah, I believe, is a first-time speaker at Federal Conference.
Hello Conference. Today I'd like to discuss a serious issue that is happening all over the UK, school absences. Here are some issues that I would like to bring to your attention. Across the UK, many children are absent on days, for example, World Book Day on Halloween, as their parents cannot afford to buy them costumes due to the cost of living and poverty. I feel this is totally unfair on them, having to miss school and fun just because they don't have a costume. I feel a way we could solve this is by providing costumes either the day before or the day of the event, which can be returned and used again. Therefore, ensuring all children have access to the activities and fun provides they don't feel left out or bullied. Baroness Ollie Grinder told me about her own local school that uses wristbands and things to ensure people are involved and not left out. This helps to reduce the environmental impact as well. Many children are also absent due to being bullied. I was one of them. As a boy threatened to stab me, and I was very scared. This caused me to be off for a few days as my parents scrambled with the school to ensure that it was safe for me to return. This should not be acceptable. A child should be able to go to school and not live in the fear of being seriously hurt or killed. When it happened at points, I felt I was alone, and the school had abandoned me, and the government had abandoned me. Many children across the UK struggle with mental health issues and are being left by the government and their schools to fend for themselves. This should not be acceptable, as a child should always have access to the help needed provided by counsellors or therapists, because sometimes when you feel alone, it is good to have someone to talk to and try and help the situation. In early 2022, my parents cared my foster brother. They had been through a lot of trauma, which my parents tried to get access to NHS counsellors, but they were on a waiting list as this was not acceptable because my foster brother needed help now. My parents had scraped together some money to afford a counsellor and go private. A local charity through our church called Kerith stepped in and also helped provide longer-term help. My foster brother did get the help they needed, but unfortunately many children aren't as lucky and get no help at all. Schools should have counsellors on site during school hours. This means that children can get help early, therefore tackling future mental health issues. When my brother was 3 years old, he was showing signs of autism. My parents sought help, but informed that he would not be put on the waiting list until he was 7 years old. They were also informed there was a 3-year waiting list. My brother was put on the waiting list when he was 7. He's now 10 years old and is still not being assessed. This is not acceptable, as children should be diagnosed straight away. That way extra help can be commenced from the start. Again, my parents have looked into private support. This is in the thousands, and who can afford that? They might be standing outside outside the hall raising money at this point. It's absolutely ridiculous that a child has to struggle in school just because they cannot get a diagnosis. The issues we have talked today, bullying, being left out, not having counsellors, mental health issues, neurodiversity, all are big issues that can cause a child to be absent or long-term absent. Thank you, conference, for listening to what I have to say. I hope this highlights the issues that children and families face. I hope you take this to heart as much as I have, and I thank you all for listening.
Thank you very much. I now ask John Hunt to stand by, and I now call Sophie Parker-Manuel, who is also a first-time speaker at Federal Conference.
Good afternoon, conference. So, yeah, I'm also a first-time speaker. Thank you. I'm also a prospective district council candidate. I'm hoping that's going to work out well for me this time. I'm totally in favour of this policy motion to tackle persistent absence in schools. It's certainly a complex issue, and I think this motion addresses it well. In particular, I support lines 45 and 46. In order to drive up attendance, we need to make the classroom a place where children want to be. And I would like to suggest that access to toilets is an important part of this. So lots of schools in the UK lock toilets during lessons, and only pupils with a special pass are allowed to go. But I think when you've got to go, you've got to go. Thank you. This is especially important and true for children and young people with bladder and bowel issues. ERIC, the Children's Bowel and Bladder Charity, say that 1 in 12 5 to 19-year-olds have continence issues. These young people shouldn't have to disclose their medical issues to their whole class every time they need to go. That's not good. And people should also not have to explain to their teacher in front of their peers that they're menstruating in order to be able to go to the loo. It's just abysmal. Yeah. I mean, really. Yeah. Kids won't be able to concentrate if they need the loo as well. I mean, it just doesn't make any sort of sense. My daughter has struggled with constipation, and it's not fun. Kids should be able to go to the loo when they need to. So I think really we should be treating children and young people with respect and giving them dignity. Yeah, I love the idea of having a mental health professional in each school. After the pandemic, yeah, one of my daughters had anxiety around hand washing and being sick and stuff because of germs and COVID. And the school was helpful. We were referred to CAMS, but we got a letter from CAMS saying the wait was a year long. We've had nothing from them. So yes, please, to mental health professionals in each school. Thank you for listening, conference, and I would urge you to support the motion. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I now ask Helen Robertson to stand by, and I now call John Hunt, who is speaking against specific lines in the motion 11 to 17 and 67 to 70.
Thank you and good afternoon, conference. This is a good motion. I'm supporting it as a whole. It rightly concentrates on the most vulnerable children for whom absenteeism is a symptom of other problems like mental health, special needs, particularly those missing off roll, which is something we invested in our council some years ago. And we had deep concerns about children disappearing from the system, and there was some tightening up of that. But I wanted to talk about the elephant in the room, which is not mentioned in this motion. And the reason I said I was speaking against that line about it being a crisis is because one of the things driving the statistics, of rising absenteeism, including persistent absenteeism, is simply term time holidays. Now, last year, 350,000 penalties were issued, a huge increase in the number of penalties issued for absenteeism, and 89% of those penalties were issued for people taking holidays. The organisation Public First looked into this and they concluded that taking term time holidays is now acceptable across all socio-economic groups. And so it's not just, if you like, the wealthy middle classes jetting off and then compensating. We know what's happening, don't we? The problem we have is an out-of-date school holiday system, exponential prices for holidays during that time. We're forcing all families to take their holidays during the same 5 to 6 weeks in the late summer in this country, now one of the wettest seasons of the year. You can't be sure which season will be the wettest, but very often it's August. And this is all based on the Victorian system, where it was the agricultural holiday that was needed. And then beyond that, it was the warmest time in the sea in the British seaside. It's incredibly out of date. And the result is that families now are treating it with contempt. And they're just taking their holidays. Schools are treating it as an administrative task now. Schools, they refuse the holiday, then they issue the penalty and they collect the £120. It's purely routine. And maybe as a party we should start looking at this, looking at options for reform and change, particularly in a changing age when there may be options for creative solutions to this, creative ways of making it possible for families, particularly the poorer families, to have more flexibility over how they take their holidays, how they can get decent prices, and how can actually take children away from home. So I hope that maybe this can be taken on board by the party as an issue that it needs to address. There is a real need for reform. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Can I now ask Prue Bray to stand by? And I now call Callum Robertson from Peterborough, who is speaking in favour of the motion.
Hello, everyone. Sorry, that was way too cheery. I just want to quickly speak in favour of this motion. I won't take up the entire time. Because persistent absence goes beyond the sort of core issues alongside people not feeling comfortable in schools, the mental health issues, etc. It goes to the core of the disadvantage gap we see in our society. When we look at the registers in schools, as teachers do, it's the same kids that are missing week in, week out. And it's disproportionately the kids on those free school meals, as Sarah pointed out, and pupil premium. Those kids lose out because they don't have the parental money for catch-up, for tutoring catch-up. They don't have the option of all the extra resources that middle-class kids have at home. The options simply aren't there. So what happens to those working-class kids is they get their GCSE results and their life chances are damaged by persistent absence, because our education system isn't set up to be equipped there. So I think we should support it on those grounds alone. I would like to rebut Lucy's point slightly. We need to get away from a culture in our society where if you've got a little bit of a cold, you stay away from work and you stay away from school. To my mind, when you have a kid with a little bit of a cold, they're still perfectly okay to be in the school building. And if they are not in the school building every time you have a blocked nose, you'll be talking at absence rates of about 50%. I mean, it's just not practical. It's just not practical to take a sick day every time you're feeling a tad under the weather. If teachers did that, parents would rightly be up in arms about the sheer number of cover lessons that went on. So something to bear in mind just when thinking about this motion. I think we should potentially be encouraging a little resilience in our young people when it comes to sickness. So I'll finish there. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Can I now ask Zoe Franklin to stand by, just to note that as we have not had anyone speaking against the amendments, we are not required to summate the amendments today. So if Zoe can stand by, and I now call Prue Bray from Wokingham. Prue is the chair of ALDC, and she is speaking for the motion as a whole, and specifically lines 58 to 60.
Thank you. Good afternoon, conference. We've had a lot of very interesting speeches, and it's been
very hard to disagree with anything anybody said, and we've tackled this from a lot of different angles. But the angle I wanted to talk about is that children who are not at school because their parents have exercised their right to choose to educate their children at home. So, as Liberals, we believe in freedom and in the individual. We don't believe in forcing one size to fit all, so we shouldn't really have a problem with the concept of elective home education. But also as Liberals, we believe that freedom does not extend to the right to harm others. And so we naturally want to make sure that when parents exercise the choice to educate a child at home, that child is both safe and being educated properly. Now, parents choose to educate at home for all sorts of reasons, and the vast majority, really the vast majority, do a good job, but some don't. And it is quite a difficult balancing act for a local authority to provide enough support for parents to educate their children well at home, while not alienating them by appearing to interfere. Now, while most parents will provide details of what their children are learning and are in fact happy to use materials provided by the local authority, some refuse, and some have even resorted to taking their local authority to court. And this conflict is not in anyone's interest, least of all the child's. A local authority has to look after the interests of all children. We have very limited rights to check on the welfare of children being educated at home and on whether they are actually receiving an education. We cannot currently be sure we even know who all the children are. And if a child is invisible, how do we know they are being educated or even that they are safe? That's why I think it is important to bring in a duty to keep a register of children who are not in school. And that's why I particularly welcome the Amendment 2 and lines 58 to 60 in the motion, which seek to make sure that that register is set up. Having such a register will help make sure all children are visible and therefore help us make sure that they are safe and getting an education. So to sum up, I support the motion because it's important to address persistent absence from school, but we do have to remember that the reason some children are not in school is that their parents have chosen elective home education, and we must find a way to work constructively with those parents for the sake of their children. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call Zoe Franklin to summate the motion. Zoe is our parliamentary candidate for Guildford, hopefully our next MP for Guildford.
So first of all, I just want to start by thanking everyone who has spoken in this debate, and it is no surprise to hear such passion and such compassion on what is, if we're all completely honest, a really complex but also really important issue. And so I'm really pleased to be able to summate and add my voice to all of us who have said that, encouraging you to vote in favour of this motion today. Over the course of today's debate, we have heard stories of children and young people known to us or who we've heard up on the doorstep who've had the right of the access to education taken from them because of the Conservative government's failure to act and tackle the huge rise in mental health issues amongst young people, the pressure being placed on SEND provision in schools, and the challenges being faced by children and their families living in poverty. I want to thank, first of all, Andy McGowan. Thank you for so clearly outlining why that Amendment 1 is so important, and we fully support that amendment. We must ensure that young carers are supported so they can attend school, gain the education they need for a successful future, and care for those they love. Thank you to Lucy for Amendment 2. It's so crucial that we have that funding to enable local government to put into action the policy that we have outlined in this motion, and we also fully support that amendment. And I'm not going to continue to name people, but I just want to highlight a couple of the issues that were spoken about so eloquently in this debate. There is clearly an enormous gap in the mental health support being provided to young people across England, and also to the number of children who need to have access to free school meals. These issues should not prevent young people from attending to school. We have also been reminded that actually fines do not address the reasons behind persistent absence, and we need to be providing the support for all the reasons that young people end up not in school. I want to particularly pause and thank Noah. Noah, amazing. I mean, the future is in this room. Thank you, Noah. Noah very powerfully highlighted the challenges that wonderful days like World Book Day and many, many other activity days where children are encouraged to dress up can actually have on young people who are unable to have a costume or whatever they need for that day, and how crucial it is we need to find ways to make sure that those young people are not excluded from coming to school on those days and enjoying the fun that is those kind of extracurricular days. And thank you too for reminding us the importance of having those dedicated mental health professionals in schools, and why we are so keen to ensure that SEND issues are highlighted and found early so that young people get the support really, really at the start of their school careers. I hear too often from schools and parents that children have been waiting for years to have their EHCP and to get the help they need. And there are so many other issues that have been tackled. I completely recognise the point around access to school toilets. I'm aware of schools in my own area that do that, and I find it deeply frustrating. And thank you for our final speaker for reminding us of the importance of the choice to homeschool, but also to ensure that we know where children are and that we know they are safe. So, conference, this motion seeks to address so many of the key issues that cause persistent absence, whether that is providing dedicated mental health support, to funding and all of the things that come with trying to address the SEND crisis. And then, of course, the really important stuff around free school meals for all children on universal credit. But I just want to pause before I end on lines 71 to 74 around extracurricular activities. School isn't always a setting where children and young people feel they belong or they want to be. And that in part is because for too long Conservatives have felt that it's all about grades and not about helping people find out who they are and what they love.
Can you please draw your remarks to a close?
They're fantastic elements. There's so much in this motion. I urge you, conference, please support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, conference, so we are now going to move to 3 votes. So we will first take a vote on Amendment 1, then Amendment 2, and then, depending on the result of those, on the motion. So, first of all, can I have a vote on Amendment 1? All those in favour, please. And is there anyone against Amendment 1? Thank you. I'm just going to check the results of the online vote on that as well, which matches what I've seen in the room, which is that amendment is carried. Thank you very much. Moving now to Amendment 2. All those in favour, please, of Amendment 2? Thank you. And is there anyone against Amendment 2? Lovely. Again, I'm just going to check the online vote. Yep, that's closed. Matches what I've seen in the room, which is that Amendment 2 is carried. So we are now going to take the final vote on the amended motion incorporating Amendments 1 and 2. All those in favour, please. Lovely. Is there anyone against that motion? And again, I'm just going to check the online vote. Again, that supports what we've seen in the room, which is that amended motion is carried. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, speakers, for keeping things swift as we were running a little behind. I would like to thank my aide, Sam Barrett, and my hall aide, Cara Jenkinson. And we are now moving on to item F14, chaired by Paul McGarry, which is 40 new hospitals, the government's broken promise.
Conference, please take a seat. We'll be starting our next motion shortly. Good afternoon, Conference. This is F14, the debate on 40 new hospitals. I call to propose the motion Daisy Cooper to the platform and ask Jackie Bell to stand by.
Good afternoon, Conference. 4 years ago, Boris Johnson, remember him? He promised to build 40 new hospitals. Guess what? There wasn't 40, they're not new, and they're not all fully fledged hospitals. That bold promise was a barefaced lie. Boris Johnson, eh? Who would have thought? Now, many of the projects that make up the government's new hospital programme, its official title, are in fact renovations or expansions of existing sites. And several of the projects were approved and underway long before Boris Johnson came up with this particular three-word slogan. The Conservatives tried once again to pull the wool over people's eyes, and now their promises are being exposed for what they are. Now, by the government's own admission, they will not complete all 40 projects by 2030. There's also scepticism about whether they can eradicate RAC from NHS buildings by 2035, and many argue that their target to do that simply is not ambitious enough in the first place. Now, we, as Liberal Democrats, have led the way in exposing the true state of our hospitals, and my team in Parliament and I, thank you very much, team, have been working hard to get information out of the government on the progress of the new hospital programme. In February last year, we discovered that barely any of the projects had even got planning permission. Only 10 out of the 40 projects had received full planning permission, and several projects had received no planning permission at all. This year, too, we discovered that hospitals were spending millions tackling pest infestations. One hospital told us they had found mice in the kitchen, maggots in the mortuary, and rat droppings in a corpse bag. Another told us of insects biting the legs of staff, ants and fly infestations, as well as rats in the ambulance area. One hospital reported pests in the children's ward and in their breast clinic. A breast clinic. In a separate investigation, we found that hospitals across the country were battling sewage leaks, pouring into hospital wards, showing again how the NHS is struggling to cope with rising repair bills. Conference, this sounds more like an episode of horrible histories than the state of our NHS. In my own area of West Hertfordshire, I've seen the state of Watford General Hospital that serves my constituents in St Albans. I've seen firsthand the faulty lifts, the aged ventilation system, the tiny corridors, the unacceptably cramped surgical and treatment wards, many of which are in crumbling, life-expired buildings. And I can reveal today that in the most recent weeks leading up to our conference, we have discovered something else. We now know that more than 2,000 hospital buildings were built before 1948, making them older than the NHS itself. Now, Conference, the Conservatives have let the NHS literally crumble before our eyes, and they've allowed the bill for hospital repairs to grow and grow and grow. It will now cost almost £12 billion just to clear the backlog of repairs. To make matters worse, they are pilfering money from NHS capital budgets to plug Conservative cuts to frontline spending. And now that their new hospital programme is completely stuck in the mud, they're just trying to keep their commitment into the long grass. That's why today I'm moving this motion to highlight the many ways the government is failing to tackle the crisis in our hospitals and our calls on them to finally fix this mess. Our calls aim to pressure the government to get their new hospital programme back on track. That starts by calling on the government to release the funds for those hospitals that are ready to get going so that construction can start as soon as possible. In my own area of West Hertfordshire, do you know how many times I've asked the government in Parliament to release the funds? I've asked 16 times. There is no reason for some of these hospital programmes to be held back, and every single day that the government holds back these funds, these projects fall further and further behind. That's why we need a commitment to a 10-year major capital programme to give long-term certainty to NHS planners to replace and repair hospital buildings regardless of who is in power. This must also come with the powers for NHS hospital trusts to spend the money that they themselves have raised from selling land or buildings so they can start fixing their hospital buildings themselves without having to wait for the government to get their act together. We also need to see a national risk register for RAC-infested buildings and for the government to bring forward their commitment to eradicate it. Conference, this is not just about buildings. It's about people. Within our hospitals are patients, patients who are scared and tired and ill, waiting for an operation next door to a room that's being held up by iron stilts. It's about the overworked and underpaid porter pushing a scared patient around in a wheelchair just past the pest control. And if there is one image for me that will sum up this Conservative government, it will be the image of an overworked nurse trying to treat a sick patient whilst mopping up a sewage leak under the crumbling roof of one of our NHS hospitals. They have run our NHS into the ground. They have left our hospital buildings to crumble. Conference, you cannot trust the Conservatives with the NHS. For goodness sake, let's kick them out. Please support the motion.
Thank you. I ask Clive Jones to stand by, and I welcome to platform Jackie Bell from East Lothian.
Promises, promises. It's not just the Tories who break promises on the NHS and new hospitals, it's the SNP too. In 2009, Nicola Sturgeon, remember her, as Health Minister, promised Dunbar a new Belhaven Community Hospital after a campaign against closure. NHS staff have continually promised it will stay open until new facilities in place. In 2010, a new hospital was part of an older people's strategy that I brought forward as East Lothian Cabinet Member for Health and Social Care, scrapped by a new Labour administration in 2012, and they're still there. SNP promises through continued discussions with excuses for non-delivery. I've got all the minutes. In 2018, Health Minister Shona Robinson, now Finance Minister, refused to spend on ward upgrade because a new hospital was planned. In 2020, we got as far as discussions on project design. In 2021, the new SNP MSP, now Housing Minister Paul McLennan, promised to care for Belhaven. Fast forward, 2024, SNP has cancelled capital spend on NHS, including Belhaven. The NHS budget is cut. The SNP blame Westminster, but it's their choice, wasting money on a delayed National Care Service rather than investing in frontline services. The future of Belhaven site, which includes the council care home, is again uncertain. Work to upgrade the water system is just being completed after Legionella was found, but the IJB has to make £12 million savings. The IJB is funded by East Lothian Council and NHS Lothian. Again, it's budget choices, East Lothian preferring to spend £5 million on a swimming pool repair rather than retain community hospital and care home beds. Recently, the residents were moved out because of failed fire inspection. Local residents are concerned that the hospital may never reopen, and senior NHS staff are keeping stum. Paul McLennan and the councillors who promised to keep Belhaven are silent. The closure of Belhaven will impact on a rural community with poor transport. It will impact on delayed discharge because of the loss of downstream NHS and affordable care home beds. Local people are angry and turning to me as the person who really cares for Belhaven. They're asking when council elections are, not until 2027, but before then, we have Westminster and Holyrood elections to effect change. Conference. People need NHS and care services that are fit for purpose. It's the Lib Dems who are fighting for our public services. Please support this motion, and thanks for bringing it forward.
Thank you. I ask Danny Chambers to stand by, and I call to the platform Clive Jones, our PPC for Wokingham.
Do you remember when the Conservatives proudly promised 40 new hospitals at the last general election? I'm a governor of one of those 40 hospitals, the Royal Berkshire Hospital. To date, not a single brick has been laid to start the building of a new hospital. We've been given a bit of money to work up plans for a new hospital. That sounds promising, but it's not easy if no one in government will tell you how much money you have to spend on a new hospital. And of course, since 2019, costs are continually rising as the Conservatives dither and delay. Let me tell you what it means when a new hospital building plan is delayed. Staff in many wards have to navigate their way around buckets that are collecting rainwater from leaking roofs. Staff and patients struggle to keep warm because heating systems break down. Staff wear outdoor coats to keep themselves warm. One of my residents told me about their partner who was a patient at the hospital. He was sitting and shivering in a chair with his teeth chattering. Staff share cramped offices, sometimes with windows that won't open because the frames are rotten. These new hospitals are desperately needed. So why aren't the government releasing funds already allocated to these projects? We cannot allow the Conservatives to raid the NHS capital budget with impunity. The NHS needs long-term planning and stability. Patients are being let down by the Conservatives. Doctors, nurses and healthcare professionals are being let down by the Conservatives. The maintenance staff in our hospitals are being let down by the Conservatives. Hospital managers are being let down by the Conservatives. I've written just a few days ago to Victoria Atkins, Secretary of State for Health, asking her to come and visit the Royal Berkshire Hospital so that she can see for herself the working conditions that her NHS staff are having to work in. She might come, the Conservatives suddenly popping up all over the country because there's a general election in the air. And myself and the 5,000 staff of the Royal Berks will be fascinated to hear what she has to say. The NHS has gone downhill every year of this Conservative government. Only a change of government and lots more Liberal Democrat MPs, including me in Wokingham, can bring a desperately needed new Royal Berkshire Hospital. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I ask Doreen Huddart to stand by and call to the platform Danny Chambers, our PPC for Winchester.
We desperately need a new hospital in Hampshire. It's one of the 40 new hospitals promised in 2019, and you can understand why local people are dubious, because this will be the second general election in a row that a Tory MP has been promising a new hospital despite having no funding and no feasible date as to when it's going to be delivered. And in fact, this uncertainty around the new hospital programme is causing a lot of anxiety for people in Winchester. There was a petition set up by a local resident called Chantel, which was opposing the potential removal of A&E services from Winchester. And people are so worried about this that over 20,000 people in Winchester have signed this petition. And I was really proud this week to be able to go to Parliament and present this petition to our fantastic health spokesperson, Daisy Cooper. The new hospital programme desperately needs confirmed funding because we need to decide on the location of a new hospital in Hampshire urgently, because there's now government-owned sites that have become available, and they're available right now in Winchester. And the longer this programme is delayed, we may lose the opportunity to actually build on these sites. But more broadly, yes, we need funding and investment in new hospitals. I support the new hospital programme, and they need to be fit to deliver 21st century healthcare. But hospitals and A&E departments, they should be for the very sick and the injured. And they should not be picking up the pieces because of a lack of government investment in primary care and public health. Because, 22% of people in an A&E department are there because they cannot get a GP appointment. There's people presenting at A&E departments who've got tooth root abscesses and other dental problems, and they cannot afford to go to private dentists, and they cannot get NHS dental appointments. 30% of people in Winchester's A&E turn up because they are in a mental health crisis, and many of those people are already on mental health waiting lists, waiting for the care and the assessment that they desperately need. So this is nearly 50% of people in A&E because they cannot access the GP appointments, the mental health care they need, the dental care they need, or the social care that they need. So my training as a vet and my work on public health programs worldwide have taught me that it is always more cost-effective to prevent disease than it is to treat it. Now, government plans for new hospitals, they need to be closely linked to investment in primary care. We need to keep people healthy in their own communities for as long as possible. It's better for patients, it's better for communities, and it's better for the taxpayer. We need a long-term, funded new hospital programme, and Tory MPs making vague promises of potential new hospitals while primary care services are slashed is just no solution at all. Because the future viability of the NHS is at stake. And that's why we need to elect...
draw your remarks to close.
And that's why we need to elect as many Liberal Democrat MPs as possible at the next general election. Thank you.
I see what you did there. I thought that was a false finish. But I now call Councillor Doreen Huddart to the platform and ask Bobby Dean to stand by.
Hello, Conference. I'd like to draw your attention to a couple of related issues. And it's not that I don't raise concerns about the broken promises to build 40 new hospitals, because I often mention this to my Brexit-supporting neighbours, and they tell me, just be patient and it will happen. I'm not going to hold my breath for that. And I'd like to point out to Conference that hospitals are only one part of our comprehensive health and social care system, and that there are thousands of doctors and nurses and other health professionals working to give a good service out there in our communities. Recently, we've been affected by the problems of closures of local pharmacies. In my case, we've had 2 or 3 closing at the same time, corporate decisions made by organisations like Boots and Lloyds. One got a petition of 700 people who had nowhere else to go. Plus, there are ongoing shortages of particular types of medication. And we hear about areas where residents can't access a GP or a dentist. And this is a disgrace in 2024. And as well as the promised hospitals, we were also promised a new swathe of treatment centres, both for urgent and non-urgent care. And Conference, if you want health checks on your babies, your children, or your families or friends have problems like diabetes, hypertension, or arthritis, you would want that facility to be local and easily accessible and to have diagnostic equipment on site so that you can get your investigations done locally. In my own area, our population need would support 4 health centres, but we only have 2. And the Interim Care Board tells us that they can't recruit enough staff for them. And that raises another issue if we continue to recruit staff from countries abroad who may have greater health need than we do. So, presently, if you can get a GP appointment, they may order a series of investigations and they may send you to a nearby hospital for that, or a health centre miles away for an X-ray or a scan. And this is a waste of time and resources. It's certainly not preventive and it's not helpful to anybody. Local health centres provide both primary and local long-term care for our residents, and these could expand the health offer and reduce pressure on hospitals. Please support the motion and remember the contribution that further investment in primary health care could add and improve the health of our nation. Thanks.
Thank you. Can I ask Blaise Bakish to stand by? And I call to the platform Bobby Dean, our PPC for Carshalton and Wallington.
Thank you. St Helier Hospital towers over my community. It's a big physical presence and it sort of marks the landscape, and its connection with the community runs just as deep. But it is in trouble. It's one of those hospitals that Daisy mentioned that is older than the NHS itself, and the condition is appalling. It gets too hot in the summer, too cold in the winter, it floods, bits of the building are propped up with pieces of wood, the toilets break, the lifts break, and the intensive care unit is simply not fit for modern-day clinical standards. It has been clear for decades that a new building is needed, but plan after plan has been put forward and failed. Now, the Conservative government's latest plan is to shut down A&E and maternity services at St Helier and deliver them at a new site many miles down the road instead. We, the community and local health workers, are against this plan because we believe there is a better, more affordable and more just plan to deliver a new building on the existing site. Nevertheless, the Conservatives have insisted that this is the way forward. But now, 4 years on, nothing has happened as St Helier has been left to crumble. The project is failing because this government has a total lack of understanding about how investment in public services can provide returns to everyone. The stupid short-termism of pinching from the capital budget to plug holes in day-to-day spending is the perfect illustration of saving a penny today and costing us £1 tomorrow. And this government likes to talk a lot about efficiency and productivity, but do they not realise how much time is lost to managing a poor and unsuitable estate? Do they not see that a population that is less healthy is less productive? And during the pandemic, there was much talk about the need to transition the NHS away from a model of so-called efficiency and towards a model built on resilience. This flips on the head the notion of waste and recognises that spare capacity in the system can be a good thing, meaning that you're able to withstand moments of high pressure. And I'm not just talking about high pressure moments like a pandemic, but also the high pressure moments we suffer every single year in the repeated winter crises. What happened to all of that talk? Now this government can't even deliver the capacity of yesterday, let alone the capacity of tomorrow. I think it's time that we brought an end to this short-sighted strategy. It's time to invest in the NHS on a scale that gets it back on its feet. And it's time to get St Helier the new building it deserves. Conference, I am proud that the Liberal Democrats are heading into this election with the health service at the top of its agenda. It is a Liberal who laid the foundations to its existence in the last century, and it will be Liberals that fight for its existence in this. Conference, we are the party of the NHS, and I urge you to back this motion.
Conference, I ask Helen Maguire to stand by, and I call Blair Quiche, our PPC for Chelsea and Fulham, to the platform.
Hello, conference. Long-time conference attendee, first-time speaker. I'm speaking today to fully support this motion. This issue shows the Conservatives' disregard, not just for our health, but for the integrity of our democracy. But it's also personal for me. I lost my father to COVID during the second lockdown in 2021. He came to Britain as a refugee from Egypt in the 1950s. His tragic passing happened in the very same week that Boris Johnson partied in Downing Street. It was the Conservatives' utter lack of contrition or remorse for dragging the NHS to breaking point and attempts to hide their partying while the NHS fell to its knees and families like mine lost loved ones. It's appalling. It moved me so much that I decided to do something about it. So I joined the Liberal Democrats. Now I'm the parliamentary candidate in Chelsea and Fulham, where one of London's most famous hospitals, Charing Cross Hospital, is based. The same hospital that my father spent his final days in. Charing Cross is one of these 40 new hospitals, but the Conservative government has dragged its feet on giving Charing Cross the much-needed refurbishment it is crying out for. When I speak to voters in Fulham, so many of them tell me of their own difficult experiences at the hospital and how its crumbling state compounded them. Now, our Conservative MP, Greg Hands, is claiming the refurbishment works as one of his key achievements. What he forgets to mention is that it is his own Conservative government that has delayed the works until after 2030. Delaying the works until next decade is unacceptable. What we need is exactly what this motion calls for, releasing the funds now for these vital works up and down the country. Liberal Democrats, we conceived of the NHS, and now we must rescue it from literally falling to pieces. We must do this for the sake of NHS staff, for the sake of patients, for the sake of all of us. And we must do this for the sake of the memory of people like my dad. Please back this motion.
Thank you. Can I ask Tom Morrison to stand by? And I call to the platform Helen Maguire, PPC for Epsom and Youghal.
Good afternoon, conference, ladies and gentlemen. So I'm speaking not just for myself, but also for the countless residents in my constituency who, like Bobby Dean's constituency, rely on Epsom and St Helier hospitals for their healthcare needs. Now, these hospitals, particularly St Helier, who've served our community for decades, were built before the NHS came into existence and are completely falling apart. As Bobby alluded to, the Conservative government has promised a new hospital in Sutton, but we want to know, where is this new hospital? What we've received is delay upon delay. So last May, Steve Barclay pledged 500 million for this new hospital, but we still haven't seen the money, we haven't seen a spade in the ground, and we haven't seen planning permission gained either. And why? Because this government decided it would have misguided instead to try to have a standardised programme for the Hospital 2.0, a plan that will now see no financial savings thanks to the economic crash engineered by Liz Truss. And meanwhile, as Daisy alluded to, patients are suffering every single day at St Helier. We've got windows that are patched up with sticky tape, ceilings that are collapsing in stock rooms, and vital equipment sits where hospital beds should be because stock rooms are unusable. And yes, we even have rats in the midwifery unit. A tarpaulin covers the ceiling to prevent leaks from entering the hospital. And our hospitals are absolutely bursting at the seams.
with staff stretched between 2 locations and precious time wasted shuttling patients from one hospital to another. The hospitals declare business continuity, or basically we've exceeded our capacity on 2 regular basis. And this was the case the other day when Janet, an 86-year-old lady, was admitted to Epsom General A&E because of sudden abdominal pain and vomiting. She was diagnosed with an acute condition and required hospital admission under the emergency surgical team. This meant a transfer to St Helier. Now, she was eventually transferred to St Helier Hospital A&E after 12 hours on a trolley. When she arrived, there was no A&E cubicles, no trolleys, nor inpatient beds. She remained on an ambulance trolley for 3 further hours before an A&E bed became available. She needed to be admitted to a hospital ward, but there was no bed available for her. She was eventually transferred from her trolley to a bed in a ward over 30 hours after she first came under hospital care. An 86-year-old lady. This is how this government is treating our residents. This is unacceptable. Epsom St Helier Trust has fewer hospitals per 1,000 people than countries like Chile and Colombia. In fact, Epsom and Ewell fares worse than the UK average, with just 1.9 beds per 1,000 people. This shortage is not just a statistic. It's a daily reality for patients like Janet who are left waiting for a bed on a trolley. It's unacceptable. How much longer must we endure this neglect? This Conservative government has utterly failed us. They betrayed their promises, jeopardising the health and well-being of our community. We demand action, we demand accountability, and we demand a new hospital now. Conference, I urge you to back this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I ask Michael Mullaney to stand by? And I call Tom Morrison, our PPC for Cheadle.
The NHS is the pride of our country. It symbolises the very best of us and the very best of Britain. And our hospitals should be key to that. They should embody the values that underpin our health service: compassion, respect, dignity, a place where everyone counts. And in Cheadle, the staff at Stepping Hill Hospital embody these very values. I'm proud of the work they do. I'm proud that anyone from any walk of life can go to Stepping Hill and expect to receive the best possible care from some of the most dedicated and wonderful people around. But the Conservatives have grossly underfunded Stepping Hill for too long. Now, I don't say this lightly, but the people working there are working in some of the worst conditions imaginable. Just before Christmas, the hospital had to close its outpatients department because it was too unsafe for people to go in. This is one of the busiest departments in the region and caused unprecedented stress for the rest of the hospital. So I mentioned this to Ed Davey, and he came to see firsthand the problems that the staff are facing. And I really don't think either of us were truly prepared for what we were about to see. We met nurses on the wards who told us they were part of a bucket squad, which meant that during rainy days, each team member would have a bucket allocated to them, and they'd have to place that bucket down so they could catch the water dripping through the ceiling to ensure that patients and staff wouldn't slip or vital life-saving equipment wouldn't get damaged. More recently, Stepping Hill's intensive care unit, the place where the most critically ill patients receive treatment, was forced to close because the roof was in danger of falling in. Imagine that. The most vulnerable patients facing life-threatening illness being forced to move because it was no longer safe for them to be there. Conference, the Conservatives have failed our NHS. It's because of them that our hospitals are falling down. It's because of them that our residents are not receiving the care they deserve. And it's because of them that our NHS staff are working in these conditions. But at all times, the staff, the doctors, the nurses, they get on with the job. They work to get their patients the best healthcare they can without hesitation. They deserve to work in a place that's safe. Our residents, our loved ones, you, we should all be admitted to hospital in the knowledge that you are in safe hands and not worrying about the safety of the building. Conference, the Conservatives have failed our NHS, so we must be the change that is needed. I urge you to support this motion.
Thank you. Can I ask Josh Babarinde to stand by? And I call to the platform Michael Mullaney, PPC for Bosworth. Thank you.
So many people are waiting for improvements to our health service that they were promised by this failing Tory government. There are those places waiting for those 40 new hospitals they were promised. And there's other health facilities people are waiting for. In my own area of Hinckley and Bosworth, we're still waiting for the walk-in centre that our area needs. We've got a large increasing population, and a health centre would be a huge benefit to the people in Hinckley and Bosworth who sadly have waited so long for it to be delivered. And sadly, so many people are waiting under this Tory government. So many people are waiting for GP appointments. So many people are waiting for operations, over 7.5 million on waiting lists. So many people are waiting longer and longer waits in A&E. So many are waiting for ambulances, often for many hours. And so many are waiting for a dentist to finally take NHS patients in their area. All this waiting, and you know, there's one thing we're waiting for that could really help our NHS. That is a general election so that we can kick this failing Tory government out of office and elect a whole team of new Lib Dem MPs who will fight for their area and their health services. Now, our Prime Minister has tried to evade responsibility for the failure to build these 40 new hospitals. It's not surprising because he's tried to evade responsibilities for the 5 promises that he made, one of which was on the health service. How often does he talk about his 5 promises? The one he may mention, the only one that's been delivered, halve inflation, and that was delivered by someone else, the change in the world economic situation. He's not delivered the economy growing, he's not delivered debt falling, he's not delivered on stop the boats, although he's tried to exploit the issue and cause division over it, and he's not delivered on reducing those hospital waiting lists either, and his government's not delivered on the 40 new hospitals either. This government's let so many people down, and worse, it's let down our precious NHS. Not delivered the hospitals, not delivered the treatments, not delivered the services people need. Pass this motion today, then get back to your areas, campaign to elect more Lib Dem MPs to fight for our NHS and get this failing Tory government out. Thank you.
Thank you. We have no amendments, so as we move to the summation, for those online, we will open the voting. So I call to the platform Josh Babarinde, who needs no introduction, our PPC for Eastbourne, who will also make this motion.
Conference, it couldn't be clearer from hearing members' powerful contributions in this debate that our NHS is woefully under-resourced and all of our communities are paying the price. We heard from Daisy, who revealed that killer finding that thousands of buildings in our NHS estate are older than the NHS itself. We also heard about rats in our NHS, which surprised me because I thought that love rat Matt Hancock was long gone from the Department of Health. We heard from Jackie, who reminded us that it's not just the Conservatives that we need to hold to account, but it's also the SNP, particularly with respect to the fight for Belhaven Hospital, that I hope that Jackie and her team succeed in. We heard from Clive, who spoke about the failure of government to reduce already committed funds for the Royal Berkshire Hospital. And we heard from Clive as well about just how much this hits staff as well as patients who are super important. We heard from Danny in Winchester and about his campaign working with those 20,000 people across his area to demand a new hospital that isn't being granted. And my heart goes out to Danny as well in his fight against the Conservative MP there, who is throwing all sorts of mud and smears in order to try to suppress the right voice that Danny is championing. We heard from Doreen, who reminded us that as well as secondary care, we've got to pay attention to primary care too. and the role that this can play in relieving our hospitals of some of the pressures that they're under. We heard from both Bobby and Helen about the fight that they're putting up for St Helier Hospital and the importance of retaining services in that constituency. Hands off maternity, hands off the A&E department. We heard an incredible story from Blaze, who I thank for so personally sharing his experiences. And again, all power to you in the fight for your hospital in your area in honour of your late father, but also in honour of your constituency too. We heard from Tom and the hospital in his constituency, an unsafe outpatients department, and the appalling bucket squad that nurses have been demoted into in light of government underinvestment. And then we heard from Michael, who made the absolutely correct point around waiting lists. The waiting list for hospital services, but my goodness, the waiting list that 65, 70 million people are on in this country to have that general election. And the NHS struggle is real in my own patch as well, Eastbourne District General Hospital. In fact, the Hospital Trust said in a report, the age and standard of the current hospital buildings presents challenges for the consistent delivery of safe, effective, responsive and efficient care. Utterly damning, which is why so many of us in all of our communities across the country have been banking on the Conservatives, honouring that pledge of the 40 new hospitals, but it is unravelling by the day. Deadlines contorted beyond recognition, the definition of new hospital redefined beyond belief. As far as I'm concerned, a new hospital means a new hospital. End of. Now, at this rate, I fear that walking into one of the Conservatives' new hospitals is going to be like walking into that car crash Willy Wonka experience in Glasgow, where the world was promised and nothing was delivered. So what are we going to do about it? Well, we've got to back this motion, folks. You've heard about some of the key provisions in there. It's critical. It's critical for patients, families, NHS staff, and our communities. It's what they need and deserve, and it's what our democracy deserves too. Because when the Conservatives promise such a big investment like this and get a parliamentary majority for it, they damn well better honour it. Let's back this motion, folks, and send a message to this government. Thank you.
Thank you. We now move to voting on the motion. So please have your voting cards out. You must be seated in order to be vote. Can I see those in favour of the motion, for the motion? Thank you. And can I see those against the motion? Okay, so that is the motion passed as a whole, quite overwhelmingly. Thank you to those who also voted online. Thank you to all the speakers. I'd also like to thank my aide, Duncan Brack, and aide, Alison Rouse, and now hand over to John Ball to chair the next section. Thank you.
I wouldn't drink the dirty water you get here. Cheers. You're going to go to the podium. You're going to go to the podium to do your report. No, do that. Good afternoon, conference. We're moving to the final session of the day. F15, which is the Parliamentary Party's reports. Very pleased to welcome Wendy Chamberlain, our Chief Whip in the House of Commons, and Lord Newby, leader of the group in the House of Lords. They have produced their report, which is in the booklet and also available on the app. Wendy will present her report, Dick will then present his report, and we have 7 questions that have been submitted that they will answer. If you have submitted a question and you want to ask a supplementary, please go to the intervention mic and you will have the opportunity to ask a supplementary after you've had your question answered. So without further ado, can I welcome Wendy and ask her to present the House of Commons report.
Thanks very much, and to all of you here at the end of the day coming to hear our reports. It's important, I believe, that the parliamentary parties in both the Commons and the Lords comes to tell you information about what we've been up to. You, after all, as activists, are the people that got, well, certainly me, here in the first place. So thank you for coming. Big thanks as well to all our staff, because frankly the secret to this job is hiring people that make you look good. But I will say on Dick's behalf and myself, Humphrey, Diz, Matt, Mo, Sarah, Ella, Jack, Toby, Cahill and our new joiner, Taka. He's been with us for 2.5 weeks and we've already dressed him in a boiler suit. And of course, to the wider teams who support us, the PAU, the media team, our individual staff, and of course, Team Conference for putting all this together. I think we all know that the government has been treading water for some time now, and its nose is beginning to fall below the waterline. And whilst I know that London MP colleagues are delighted with the pedicabs bill, a lot of parliamentary time is being spent on reprehensible policies such as the Rwanda bill and desperate attempts to minimise the damage to the Tories at the general election with cuts to national insurance. Indeed, I think many of you may have seen reports that says that actually the sitting times that we've had in the Chamber and the Commons has been some of the shortest in this parliamentary session, and that's simply because the government is giving us so little to do. But these reports do give us a chance to give you a sense of what we're working on, both to fight the government's agenda, but also to set our own. And so I just want to quickly run through a roll call on terms of our MPs. Ed's meeting with the South Korean President and work with carers and the Young Carers APPG. I know that you all know how close that is to his heart. Tim's campaigns on ticket office closures, successful, and Farmer SFI report, he was the hit of NFU conference. Manira's Westminster Hall debate on cancer care in the South East this week. Richard standing up for both rural communities and the armed forces. Sarah Dyke, MP since summer last year, already making a name for herself on supporting rural communities, particularly around the mental health of farmers. Vera was named the Environmental Champion of the Year by the Environmental APPG. Can't get better than that. Daisy, as we've just heard in the motion, holding the government's feet to the fire on their broken promise to deliver those 40 new hospitals. Helen's work on renters reform. Sarah's response, as you heard earlier, to the failed budget. Jamie's new second office. He's got a huge constituency and work on rural post offices. Christine's campaigns in Scotland against the SNP council cuts. Sarah Green's Chalk Streams Private Members Bill and response to the trade bills, and Alistair's very vocal opposition to the Rwanda bill. My own work on Pan's Panda and supporting WASPy women. And finally, as we heard so powerfully today, Layla's important voice amidst the misery in Gaza and Israel. I think that just gives you a flavour. There's lots more that we're up to. Before we come to questions, I'll hand over to Dick. Thank you.
Thanks, Wendy. Unlike the Commons, the Lords is working very long hours, and my colleagues are amazingly assiduous at doing the main job of our bit of the legislature, at least, which is to scrutinise legislation and try and make it better. But all our activity in recent weeks, and for the next couple of weeks at least, has been very much concentrated on the Rwanda bill. Here, we've had an extraordinary situation that the treaty that was signed in respect of Rwanda had to be approved first. A cross-party group said that Rwanda, in the Lords, said that, that Rwanda couldn't be deemed safe unless 10 conditions were met. The government said, it doesn't matter. We're going to say in the bill that it's safe already, and you're just going to have to lump it. So there was then, needless to say, at report stage, a series of votes, and the government lost 10 of them. The main vote, which said you can't say Rwanda is safe unless it is safe, was passed by a majority of over 100, with, I think this is a record, 6 former cabinet secretaries voted against the government. I mean, these guys are very circumspect, and some of them are pretty traditional and don't like voting against the government, but all of them were there because they feel that this bill is driving a coach of horses through most of the attributes of a sensible liberal democracy. So we've now got to the point that we've passed our 10 amendments. The bill's gone to the Commons. I think Wendy's dealing with it on Monday. We're dealing with it again on ping pong on Wednesday. And then we will see quite what happens. It's been very tricky to know how things were going to go because Labour, first of all, said that they were under instructions to allow this bill to go through with no delay, not even delay it, which was pathetic. But we sort of thought, oh, well, you know, not much we can do about that. And now they've decided they do want to delay it a bit. Not much, but a bit. So we will give the government a bit more of a run for its money, which is a good thing, but we could have done a lot more. We voted against it at second reading. We could have killed it at second reading if we'd been supported by Labour. There would have been enough crossbench support. But we'll now just continue our efforts to mitigate the worst parts of it. The other thing I just wanted to say was, whatever the result of the next election, let's assume there is a Labour government, and whatever size its majority may or may not be, it will not win a single vote in the Lords unless we vote with it. At the moment, there are 104 more Tories in the Lords than there are Labour people, and on the day after polling day, that will be greater disparity because there are more Tories being shovelled in almost as we speak. And therefore, for a period, which may be quite a period, Labour will depend on us and the crossbenchers if they're to win any votes, which will give us great leverage to improve legislation after the next election. And that's something we like doing, and I can assure you we will hold them to account and make sure that legislation that they're putting forward gets the Lib Dem treatment to the best of our ability. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just before we move on to the questions, perhaps I could, on behalf of the party, the ordinary members, say how proud we are of our 2 parliamentary teams, what a great job they do, high calibre MPs and Lords we have. So the first question, in fact, it's 2 questions have been submitted and we've composited them. And so both Sam Cook and Emily Tester can ask a supplementary if they're here. And that question is, what more can we do as a party to tackle the rise of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia?
I'm going to take that one, Chris. Thanks very much. I think we are all deeply disturbed to see that both anti-Semitism and Islamophobia are massively on the rise across the UK. And let's be honest, within our party too. And I know our equalities team are very concerned about this and are keeping a watching brief on what's most helpful for us to be doing or saying in response. From a parliamentary approach, we've been meeting regularly with groups that monitor issues such as the Community Security Trust and Tell Mama. One thing that has become clear throughout these meetings that as parliamentarians, we've got such an important role to play in being measured and responsible with our language, and that's essential for taking the heat out of the debate at a time when tensions are high. But at the same time, we have routinely raised a number of issues with the Equalities Minister, including to push for more action on funding to tackle anti-Semitism in schools, call to immediately hire an independent advisor on Islamophobia after Conservative ministers have left the post vacant for 2 years, and finally to challenge the government on their decision to pool funding for the interfaith network. Much, much more still to do, but that gives you some idea of what we are doing as a parliamentary group across both houses.
Thank you, Wendy. Are Sam or Emily available for a supplementary? I can't see anybody. So we'll move on to the second question, which has been submitted by Rebecca Jones. Following a meeting with transgender members of the Liberal Democrats, what is the parliamentary party doing to advance transgender rights nationally? Dick?
Yeah, since the last conference, and indeed within the last couple of weeks, we've had the second reading in the Lords of Laurel Libert's bill, which would ban conversion therapy. And in an extremely unpleasant debate, really, which brought out the worst of some members on the Tory side, we got that bill through at second reading, and we made it very clear, and Lolly made it very clear, that any such ban needs to be inclusive of trans people, and it was that element of it that really got some of the Tories going. So we will push this. I mean, I think it's fair to say that the chances of it becoming law are not very great, but we will do all we can to progress it in the Lords. I think in the Commons, the MPs are always keen to stand up for trans people, and Vera, for example, recently spoke out against the government's attempts to restrict the number of countries we accept gender recognition certificates from. So we're sort of on the case. This isn't a subject that comes up absolutely every day, but whenever we can, we respond in a way which we hope is supportive of the trans community.
Thank you very much, Dick. Is Rebecca here, and does she want to ask a supplementary? Can't see her. Thank you very much. We'll move then to question 3, which is from Chaz Smith. What can the Liberal Democrats do to promote clean energy production in the UK?
Thanks very much, Chris. I'll take this one. To tackle climate change, cut energy bills, which is so important for many, and create well-paid jobs for the future. Our policies make homes warmer and cheaper to heat with a 10-year emergency upgrade programme, and to provide incentives for the installation of solar and heat pumps. Require all new homes and non-domestic buildings to be built to a zero carbon standard. Remove the Conservatives' unnecessary restrictions on new solar and wind power, and support investment and innovation in tidal and wave power. If any of you haven't been up to Orkney, you should get up there to see the work that's been done there in Alistair's constituency. Help people with the cost of living and their energy bills by implementing a proper one-off windfall tax and the super profits of oil and gas producers and traders. I find it incomprehensible that the SNP appear to be the only party in Scotland now standing up for the oil and gas producers who are raking in billions. Invest in more energy storage and build more electricity interconnectors and grid infrastructure. Expand community and decentralise energy. I think we've been very strong on that for a long period of time, and Vera has particularly. And to maintain the ban on fracking, introduce a ban on new coal mines, and end fossil fuel subsidies.
Thank you, Wendy. Is Chase here to ask a supplementary? Can't see anybody. So we can move on to Callum Robertson's question, which I think Wendy's going to take again. What can Liberal Democrat members in England and Wales do to help preserve the United Kingdom in the face of the SNP's drive to divide?
I love this question. Do what your Scottish colleagues ask, would be my first thing. Don't fall into the trap of thinking the SNP are soft and cuddly and progressive, because they aren't. And I say that being married to one. Remember that he's soft and cuddly in other ways. Remember that some pretty important things like health, education and law are devolved to Scotland. We have, in my office, our own special mugs that say that's devolved. If you're in doubt, ask and check, because that is something that, one, infuriates us, but second of all, it plays into that nationalist argument that England doesn't understand Scotland, or indeed Wales devolution, or Northern Ireland devolution more generally. Help us get the Conservatives out, because with having a change in, the Conservative government currently is the biggest recruitment tool that the Scottish National Party currently have. So a change of government, getting the Tories out of power, will go some way to help us in relation to that. And finally, engage positively with federalism. These are the quick conversations I have on doorsteps with people who I would consider to be soft SNP, where I say that, just because I believe that Scotland's future is best placed within the UK doesn't mean that I don't think the UK needs to fundamentally change. We believe in federalism as a party, and I believe that's how we will keep the union together whilst accommodating that need for variation that we as Liberal Democrats at all levels recognise so well.
Thank you very much. Callum, did you want to exercise your right to reply? I thought you would.
Thanks, Chris. You know me so well. Just say thank you for that comprehensive response. Just as a sort of a follow-up, you mentioned education being a particular weak point for the Scottish Government. What would you say is sort of the remedy to that in terms of both behaviour crisis within Scottish schools, but also the falling standards following the curriculum reforms introduced by the SNP?
If I start with the latter, first, Callum, thank you for that. Is one of the key challenges around the falling standards in education in Scotland is that the Scottish Government has removed Scotland from a number of the international mechanisms that are used to monitor performance. And frankly, what gets measured gets attention. So I would want to see us making sure that we're re-entering all of those. In relation to the violence in schools, it is something that I get from a casework perspective on a very regular basis. Willie Rennie, my MSP colleague, is on the Education Committee at Holyrood and has done a huge amount of work on that. I think the challenge is that in some ways Scottish education everything is very much still within local authority control and management, and as a result, I think some of the key innovations and responsibilities that head teachers can have over their schools and be creative in terms of how they manage their schools means that is, for me, one of the reasons why things are falling behind. And I think it's very easy for the Scottish Government to continually talk about the impact of the pandemic. These standards were falling well before then. And, you know, it's great to see England doing well in terms of standards, but it's very disappointing to see that is at the expense of Scotland's decline.
Thank you, Andy. Move to question 5, which is from Tara Copeland. Does the Parliamentary Party support the abolition of leasehold?
Oh, no, leaseholder, that's 6.
Sorry. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, you've got me again. So we've long supported abolishing residential leasehold and capping ground rents to a nominal fee. I'm saying this obviously as a Scottish MP. We don't have leasehold. Lloyd George launched a campaign against leasehold in 1909. I did not know that until now. Describing the leasehold system as blackmail, not business. And under leasehold, owners, as I'm sure you all know, can be charged extortionate rents and fees by the owner of the land, which is a relic of feudalism. So let's be very clear, the Lib Dems would abolish leasehold for all residential properties and completely ban them from all new buildings of any type of property. It will not surprise you to know that the Conservatives promised leasehold reform in their manifesto and have pledged to abolish it, but this remains another one of their broken promises, as their leasehold and freehold reform bill still contains loopholes and is still making its passage through Parliament currently.
Thank you very much. Is Tara here? Does she want to ask a supplementary? Then if we can move on to the next question, which is from Jack Roberts. Do we support Labour's proposal for reform in the House of Lords?
It's impossible to support Labour's proposal because they don't have one. Gordon Brown made a proposal for a very much smaller House of Lords with a very limited constitutional role, which would be largely elected, but have a number of appointed people on it, including local council leaders. There is nobody in the Labour Party who thinks this is a sensible idea. So whatever they're going to do, it's not going to be that. They have not got, or rather not announced a policy for reform of the House of Lords. They appointed somebody, recruited from the Institute of Government in December to get them thinking about it. They are very, very conservative about reform. They could easily abolish the hereditaries, which would get rid of 90. What the key problem about the Lords, if you're not going to elect it, which is what we're going to do, but if you accept that they won't do that, the key problem is far too big. You can get rid of 90 hereditaries, one. You can have a retirement age for another. The mean age of my group is 73 and a half years old. There is no institution, there is no body in the UK which is as old within a very, very, very big margin as the House of Lords, and a retirement age would begin to address that. But Labour haven't even committed themselves to that. So we will support sensible reform so that get the size of the House of Lords down, begin to get a more sensible balance between the Tories and Labour, whilst accepting that in the short term, at least, we're not going to achieve our own aim for an elected House of Lords, because whatever Labour do, they're not going to do that.
Thank you. Is Jack here, and does he want to ask a supplementary? No? So we'll move on to the final question, which has been submitted by Joshua Price. What more will the party be doing to highlight the impact of the real terms local government funding cuts?
Well, one of the advantages that we do have in the Lords is that we still have a lot of rights in terms of initiating debates, and we have our own Lib Dem Debates Day. So the last one of those, which was a couple of weeks ago, half the day we devoted to this very specific issue. And we're going to be doing it again next Thursday. John Shipley's got another longish debate exactly to highlight the impacts of local government funding cuts. So in the Lords, we're fortunate in that we've got a lot of opportunity to debate these things. I'm fortunate in my group of having a fantastic group of former council leaders who can make the case for improved financial settlement for local government based on their own experience. And wearing my hat as chair of the manifesto, we'll be looking at a range of things, whether it's social care, whether it's planning, whether it's potholes, where we'll be looking to find and will be finding additional revenue streams so that the pressures on local government finances can be eased, because we all agree that the current situation is simply untenable.
Thank you very much. Does Joshua want to exercise the right of reply? No? Okay, then perhaps we could just launch the online voting. We have two votes, one to accept the House of Commons report and one to accept the House of Lords report. So can I ask all those in favour of accepting the Commons report, please show. Thank you very much. And those against? I think you've done that quite comprehensively. And the House of Lords, those in favour? Thank you. And those against? Again, I think that's quite conclusive. Jenny, are we okay? Then both reports have been accepted, and we can break for the evening, and we'll see you again tomorrow morning. Thank you. Thank you very much.